The night my family locked me in the basement, they were popping champagne right above my head. They assumed I was just the invisible girl they could erase from the will in 24 hours. They had no idea this damp room had been wired with cameras for months. And the person watching the live feed wasn't just anyone. It was my billionaire grandmother. And she was already on her way with a lawyer to burn their entire plan to the ground. My name is Lena Rourke, and the first thing I registered was the stinging sensation radiating from my right wrist. It was a sharp, throbbing reminder of the struggle that had taken place only an hour ago. I blinked, trying to force my eyes to adjust to the suffocating darkness, but the only light came from a single, naked bulb swinging precariously from the ceiling, flickering with a low, buzzing hum like a dying insect. The air tasted stale, a heavy mixture of wet concrete, old cardboard, and the metallic tang of rust. It was the smell of being forgotten. I pushed myself up from the cold floor, my joints stiff. I was in the basement of my childhood home in Fairfield, Ohio. Above me, the floorboards creaked rhythmically. I could hear the muffled thud of heavy footsteps, the clinking of expensive crystal glasses, and the distinct, raucous laughter of my cousin Evan. They were playing jazz music, something upbeat and celebratory. The contrast made my stomach churn. My family was hosting a party upstairs. They were toasting, eating canapés, and celebrating their victory while I sat in the dark beneath their feet. To the guests arriving in their luxury sedans, this was likely billed as a family reunion, or perhaps a celebration of my father's upcoming business expansion. But I knew the truth. They were celebrating the changing of a will. They were celebrating the erasure of Lena Rourke. I walked over to the heavy wooden door at the top of the short staircase. I tried the handle. Though I already knew the outcome, it was locked tight. Not just the simple interior lock, but the heavy deadbolt my father had installed 3 years ago for security. I rattled it once, purely out of instinct, but the metal held firm. "Hey!" I shouted, though my voice lacked real panic. "Open this door!" The only response was a burst of laughter from the living room directly above. They could hear me. I knew they could. They just did not care. This basement was not new to me. Growing up, this had been my time-out zone, whenever I failed to smile correctly for a family photo, or when I scored a B on a report card, while Evan brought home a participation trophy that was treated like a Nobel Prize. I was sent down here to think about my attitude. My parents, Patrick and Colleen, never called it punishment. They called it a calibration period. A time for me to reflect on how my mediocrity was affecting the family image. But tonight felt different. The air did not feel like a timeout. It felt like a prison cell. I reached into my pocket for my phone. The screen lit up, casting a ghostly blue glow on the cinder block walls. No service. I tapped the Wi-Fi icon. Nothing. My heart sank, though a part of me had expected this. I moved toward the corner of the room where the old water heater stood. 6 months ago, during a brief visit where I had pretended to be the dutiful daughter fixing their internet. I had installed a secondary signal booster and a router hidden behind a stack of old National Geographic magazines. It was my failsafe, my secret tether to the outside world. I shoved the magazines aside. The space was empty. My breath hitched. The dust there was disturbed, showing fresh finger marks. They had found it. Someone had swept this room before they shoved me down here. They knew about my habit of always having a backup plan. They knew I was tech-savvy, and they had systematically stripped me of every tool I had. This was not a spur-of-the-moment decision born of a heated argument. This was a calculated extraction. I sat back down on an old crate, trying to slow my breathing. Panic was what they wanted. Panic was useful to them. If I panicked, I would scream until my voice broke. I would bang on the door until my knuckles bled. And when they finally opened the door, I would look exactly like what they needed me to look like. Unhinged. Voices drifted down through the ventilation grate near the ceiling. The music had lowered slightly. "Is she quiet down there?" It was my mother, Colleen. Her voice was tight, anxious, but not out of concern for me. It was the anxiety of a hostess worried that a stain on the carpet might ruin the evening. "She stopped banging," a male voice replied. It sounded like their family lawyer, or perhaps the local doctor they had been whining and dining lately. "Good," my mother said. I could hear the click of her heels pacing the hardwood floor. "Tomorrow morning, Dr. Aris is coming over to finalize the paperwork. He says that given her outburst tonight, the temporary holding order will be easy to sign off on. We just need to keep her contained until the alcohol wears off. We can claim she was a danger to herself." "And the guardianship?" the man asked. "Patrick is handling the filing with the court in Denver," Colleen replied, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried perfectly through the metal vent. "Once we have the mental incompetency ruling, the power of attorney over her assets reverts to us as next of kin. Eleanor is too old and too sick to fight it. By the time the old woman realizes what happened, Lena will be in a facility getting the help she so clearly needs, and the transfer of the Rourke Transit shares will be annulled." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. So that was it. They were not just trying to cut me out. They were trying to bury me. They were going to paint me as mentally unstable. They would use my anger, my isolation, and my frantic attempts to escape this basement as proof that I had snapped. A guardianship. It was a terrifyingly efficient way to strip a woman of her rights, her money, and her voice, all under the guise of protection. My mind flashed back to 3 weeks ago, the boardroom in Denver. The skyline of the city had been gray and overcast, but inside the offices of Rourke Transit Holdings, the atmosphere had been electric. My grandmother, Eleanor Rourke, sat at the head of the mahogany table. She was 82 years old, frail, breathing with the help of a portable oxygen concentrator, but her eyes were as sharp as cut diamonds. My parents and Evan had been sitting on one side, smiling like sharks, expecting the announcement of Evan's promotion to CEO. I had been sitting in the back, taking notes, invisible as always. "I have made a decision regarding the future of this company," Eleanor had said, her voice raspy but firm. "I am stepping down as chairwoman." Evan had actually started to half rise from his chair, buttoning his suit jacket. And Eleanor continued, ignoring him, "I am transferring 51% of my voting shares and the position of interim CEO to the only person in this room who understands that logistics is about people, not just profit." She turned her gaze to the back of the room. "Lena." The silence that followed had been so heavy it felt physical. My father's face had turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. My mother had simply dropped her glass of water. Evan looked as if he had been slapped. "Lena?" my father had choked out. "Mother, she is an analyst. She has no executive experience. She is quiet. She is fragile. She is competent," Eleanor had snapped. "And she is the only one of you who hasn't asked me for a loan in the last 5 years." That meeting had put a target on my back. I knew they would be angry. I expected lawsuits. I expected guilt trips. I expected them to tell me I was stealing Evan's birthright, but I had not expected this. I had not expected them to lure me back to Ohio under the pretense of a peace offering, only to drug my wine and lock me in a basement like a rabid dog. I looked around the dim room. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of my technology, my communication, and my dignity. They thought the basement was my prison. I stood up and walked toward the far wall, behind the old furnace. The concrete there was stained with decades of soot. To anyone else, it was just a dirty wall in a dirty basement, but I knew every inch of this house. I knew its secrets because I had spent my entire childhood hiding in its shadows. I knelt down near the floor. There was a loose cinder block, third from the bottom, second from the left. It was heavy, gritty against my fingertips. I wiggled it. It moved. My heart hammered against my ribs. If they had found the router, had they found this? I pulled the block free with a soft, grinding noise. I reached my hand into the dark cavity behind the wall. My fingers brushed against cobwebs, and then cold plastic. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was still there. I pulled out a small, black device. It was a battery-operated, high-definition, wide-angle camera with a built-in cellular transmitter that operated on a completely different frequency than standard consumer electronics. I had bought it from a security contractor I worked with in Denver. Alongside it was a high-capacity battery pack and an encrypted USB drive. I checked the device. A tiny pinprick red light was blinking steadily. Recording. A cold, grim smile touched my lips. My grandmother, Eleanor, was a billionaire, not because she was lucky, but because she was paranoid. When she handed me the keys to the kingdom 3 weeks ago, she had pulled me aside. She had gripped my hand with surprising strength, her fingers feeling like dry twigs. "They will come for you, Lena," she had whispered. "Money makes people do ugly things. Family makes them justify it. When they make their move, they will try to silence you. Do not fight them with noise. Fight them with evidence." She had told me to prepare. She had told me to bait the trap. "When they lock you up," she had said, "that is when you are liberated, provided you have the courage to let the world watch." I had come to this dinner tonight knowing something might happen. I had felt the tension the moment I walked through the door. I had seen the way my father's eyes lingered on the door to the basement. So, earlier in the evening, before I drank the wine that tasted slightly too bitter, before the dizziness set in, I had come down here. I had activated the camera I hid months ago during Thanksgiving. I looked at the little red light. "Are you watching, Grandma?" I whispered into the silence. I knew she was. The feed was live. It was streaming directly to a secure server in Denver, and from there to the tablet of Thomas Hale, the most ruthless litigation attorney in the state of Colorado. Suddenly, the heavy oak door at the top of the stairs rattled. A key turned in the lock. The door opened a crack, slicing a beam of yellow hallway light across the dusty floor. My father, Patrick, stood there. He was silhouetted against the light, holding a tumbler of scotch. He looked like a giant looming over a pit. "Lena," he barked. His voice was slurred, thick with false bravado. I stayed silent, sitting on the crate, tucking the small camera device behind a pile of rags so only the lens peered out. "You need to calm down," he said, his voice echoing off the concrete. "We are doing this for your own good. You are having an episode. You know how you get." "An episode?" I asked, my voice steady. "Is that what we are calling grand larceny now, Dad?" He stepped onto the first step but stopped. He did not want to come down into the filth. He wanted to stay in the light. "Don't use big words you don't understand," he sneered. "Tomorrow, Dr. Aris will assess you. If you are cooperative, if you sign the transfer papers voluntarily, we can avoid the messy court proceedings. You can go back to your little data entry job or whatever it is you do, and Evan can run the company as it was intended. We will even give you a stipend, $2,000 a month. That is more than enough for a girl like you." "A girl like me," I repeated. "Yes, a girl who is clearly overwhelmed," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Think about it. Lena, nobody is going to believe you. It is your word against the entire family. We have the doctor. We have the history. You are just the sad, quiet daughter who cracked under the pressure of a responsibility she never earned." He leaned forward, his face twisting into a mask of ugly pity. "If you sign the papers tomorrow, all of this ends. You can come upstairs. You can have a piece of cake. We can be a family again." He waited for me to beg. He waited for me to cry and thank him for his generosity. I looked up at him, my eyes adjusting to the glare. I thought about the years I had spent trying to please this man, the years I spent making myself small so his ego would have room to breathe. I thought about the bruises on my wrist. "No," I said. Patrick sighed, a sound of exaggerated disappointment. "Have it your way. Enjoy the dark. Lena, maybe a night with the rats will bring you some clarity." He stepped back. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. The deadbolt slid home with a final, metallic thud. Darkness swallowed me again. But this time, I was not afraid. I reached into the shadows and picked up the camera. I adjusted the angle, setting it on the shelf so it captured the entire room, the locked door, and me sitting in the center of the frame. I looked directly into the lens. "My name is Lena Rourke," I whispered. knowing my voice was being carried hundreds of miles away. I am currently being held against my will at 1642 Maple Creek Lane, Fairfield, Ohio. The time is 11:15 in the evening. My parents, Patrick and Colleen Rourke, along with my brother Evan, have conspired to drug me and imprison me to force me to sign over my inheritance. I took a deep breath. They think I am trapped, I said, a fierce heat rising in my chest. But they are the ones who just locked themselves in a cage with the truth. Above me, the music swelled. I heard the pop of a champagne cork. They were toasting to their success. They were toasting to the money they thought was already theirs. Let them drink. Let them laugh. I settled back against the cold wall. I would wait. I would wait for the sun to rise. I would wait for the lawyer. And I would wait for the sound of my grandmother's wheelchair on the front porch, which would sound louder and more terrifying to them than a tank rolling over the flower beds. Tonight, this basement was not a prison. It was the first courtroom of the Rourke family trials, and I was the presiding judge. Fairfield, Ohio, was the kind of town where privacy was a myth. It was a place where the butcher knew your cholesterol level before your doctor did, and where a missing Sunday church service was discussed at the post office by Monday morning. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. They knew the Rourke family. They knew my father, Patrick, who wore his suits a little too tight and laughed a little too loud at the country club. They knew my mother, Colleen, who could spot a speck of dust on a mantelpiece from 3 rooms away. And they certainly knew Evan. But me? To the town of Fairfield, and to the people living inside my own house, I was little more than background noise. I was the static between the clear radio stations. I remember being 10 years old, sitting in the living room while my parents hosted one of their mandatory Sunday socials. The room was warm, smelling of pot roast and expensive cologne. My cousin Evan, who was 12 at the time, sat in the center of the plush beige sofa. He was flanked by my mother and father, creating a perfect, symmetrical tableau of the family they wanted the world to see. Evan was the golden boy, the heir apparent, the one who carried the Rourke jawline and the Rourke charisma. He was telling a story about a winning goal he had scored in soccer, embellishing the details with the confidence of a politician. I sat 6 feet away on a metal folding chair pressed against the wall. It was always the folding chair. While they sank into the velvet cushions, I perched on cold steel. I learned early on that comfort was a resource in this house, and like all resources, it was allocated to those who showed the highest return on investment. Evan was the investment. I was the depreciation. I watched them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a different species. I recorded the way my mother's eyes crinkled with genuine delight when Evan spoke, a stark contrast to the thin, strained line her mouth formed whenever I entered the room. I noted how my father poured Evan a glass of sparkling cider as if it were champagne, toasting to his future as the head of the logistics empire my grandmother Eleanor had built. "He has the mind for it," my father would boom, clapping a hand on Evan's shoulder. "Sharp, assertive, he is going to take Rourke Transit to the moon." I did not say anything. I just shifted on my metal chair and traced the pattern of the wallpaper with my eyes. The hierarchy of our household became undeniably clear the summer Evan turned 13. For his birthday, my parents and his parents pooled their money to buy him a brand new mountain bike. It was a magnificent machine, matte black with 21 gears and shocks that cost more than my entire wardrobe. He rode it once around the driveway, skidded to a halt, and tossed it onto the lawn before running inside to play video games. 2 weeks later, for my birthday, I walked out to the garage to find Evan's old bike leaning against the workbench. It was a rusted blue thing with a bent front rim and a chain that hung loose like a dead snake. "It just needs a little elbow grease," my mother said, not looking up from her gardening magazine. "Don't be ungrateful. Lena, it is a perfectly good frame." I did not cry. Crying was a waste of hydration and energy. Instead, I walked over to the workbench. I did not have new parts, and I certainly did not have help. I found a tin of grease that had separated from age and a set of rusty wrenches my father had discarded years ago. For 3 days, I did not speak to anyone. I spent every waking hour in that garage. I took the chain apart, link by greasy link, soaking them in vinegar to eat away the rust. I used a rubber mallet to true the wheel, spinning it hundreds of times until the wobble disappeared. I adjusted the tension on the brakes until they snapped shut with satisfying precision. When I finally rode it down the driveway, it didn't rattle, it hummed. I felt a surge of quiet, electric power in my chest. I had taken something broken and made it functional. I had optimized it. I rode past Evan, who was sitting on the porch. He laughed. "Look at the trash collector," he sneered. "Riding my garbage." My mother stepped out the door and frowned at me. "Lena, look at your hands. You are covered in grease. Go wash up before the neighbors see you looking like a mechanic." That was the narrative. Evan was an executive in training. I was a janitor in the making. Whenever I failed to adhere to this narrative, whenever I argued back, or refused to smile, or simply existed too loudly, the basement became my destination. It wasn't a dungeon. My parents were careful never to leave marks or do anything that could be legally construed as abuse. They called it educational isolation. "Go downstairs and think about your attitude," my father would say, pointing to the door. "Stay there until you can be pleasant." At first, the basement terrified me. It was a cavern of shadows, smelling of damp earth and neglected storage boxes. But as the years went by, the fear evaporated, replaced by a strange sense of relief. The basement was the only place in the house where I did not have to perform. I did not have to pretend to be invisible because down there, the darkness made it true. It was in that silence that I discovered my obsession. While Evan was upstairs watching cartoons or playing sports, I would sit on the concrete floor with a stack of old road atlases I had salvaged from the recycling bin. I was fascinated by the veins of the country, the interstates, the highways, the blue and red lines that connected city to city. I started watching the trucks on the small television set my father had banished down there. I didn't care about the shows. I cared about the commercials for freight companies. I cared about the news segments showing traffic jams. I started to ask questions that nobody wanted to hear. Why did the milk truck arrive at the grocery store at 6 in the morning? How did a package from China get to our doorstep in 3 days? I began to draw. I taped sheets of printer paper together to create massive, sprawling maps on the basement wall behind the furnace. I wasn't drawing fantasy lands. I was drawing supply chains. I mapped out a hypothetical route from Fairfield to Denver. I calculated the mileage. I estimated fuel costs based on the numbers I heard my father complain about. I created schedules. If a truck left Ohio at 8 in the morning traveling at 60 miles per hour, accounting for 2 mandatory rest stops and 1 fuel stop, when would it reach the distribution hub in St. Louis? I filled notebooks with these calculations. I counted phantom containers. I optimized loading docks in my head. To my family, I was staring at a wall. In my mind, I was conducting an orchestra of motion. One afternoon, when I was 12, the air in the house changed. It became charged, frantic. My grandmother, Eleanor Rourke, was coming for a rare visit. Eleanor was a titan, even at 70. She was a force of nature who ran Rourke Transit with an iron fist. She rarely left her headquarters in Denver, so her arrival in Ohio was treated like a state visit from royalty. My mother spent 2 days scrubbing floors that were already clean. My father bought a new suit. Evan was coached on what to say, how to stand, and which business buzzwords to drop into conversation. "Lena," my mother said, handing me a tray of appetizers. "Stay out of the way. Just pass the napkins and keep your mouth shut. We don't want to overwhelm her." When Eleanor arrived, she looked small in her wheelchair, but her eyes were terrifying. They swept over the room like a scanner, assessing value. "Evan," she said, her voice like dry parchment, "tell me about school." Evan launched into his rehearsed speech about leadership camp and his grades. My parents beamed. I stood by the kitchen door, holding a tray of deviled eggs, watching the performance. Halfway through the visit, Eleanor asked to use the restroom. My mother rushed to assist her, but Eleanor waved her off. "I can manage my own chair. Colleen, stop hovering." She rolled down the hallway. I watched her turn the corner. A few minutes later, I realized she hadn't gone to the guest bathroom. She had turned left, toward the basement door, which my father had left slightly ajar after fetching a bottle of wine. Panic flared in my chest. My maps, my drawings, they were taped all over the wall down there. My parents would be furious if they saw the mess. I crept down the hallway and peered through the crack in the door. Eleanor was at the bottom of the stairs. She had not gone all the way down, but she had stopped on the landing where the light switch was. From there, she had a clear view of the furnace wall. She was sitting perfectly still in her chair, staring at the sheets of paper taped to the concrete. She was looking at the routes I had drawn in red marker. She was reading the timetables I had scribbled in the margins regarding fuel efficiency and driver fatigue limits. I held my breath, waiting for her to laugh, waiting for her to call my father and ask why his daughter was defacing the house with nonsense. Instead, she did something that froze me in place. She reached out with a trembling hand and peeled one of the smaller drawings off the wall. It was a schematic I had made of a cross-docking facility aimed at reducing dwell time for perishable goods. She folded the paper neatly into a perfect square. Then, she slipped it into the pocket of her tweed blazer. She turned her chair around and rolled back toward the stairs. I scrambled back to the kitchen before she could see me. When she returned to the living room, she said nothing. She did not mention the basement. She did not mention the drawing. She just looked at Evan, who was now bragging about a video game high score, and then her gaze slid over to me, for 1 second. Just one. Her eyes locked onto mine. There was no warmth, but there was recognition. It was the first time in my life I felt seen. But the moment passed. The visit ended. Life returned to its suffocating normal. "You are such a dreamer, Lena." My father chided me the next day when he found me reading a library book on industrial engineering. "Head in the clouds. You need to be practical. Go help your mother peel potatoes." Practicality, for me, meant servitude. While Evan was sent to a prestigious summer business camp in Vermont costing $5,000, I was assigned the household chores. I vacuumed. I scrubbed the patio. I prepped dinner. "It builds character," my mother said, sipping iced tea while I weeded the garden in 90-degree heat. But they didn't know what I was doing at night. While they slept, I was on the family computer in the den, using the dial-up connection to access the world they thought was beyond me. I found free courseware from universities. I read white papers on supply chain management. I learned about just-in-time delivery systems and the complexities of international customs. I didn't have a teacher, so I taught myself. I absorbed the logic of logistics because it was the only thing in my life that made sense. In logistics, if you put the right input in, you got the predictable result. In my family, no matter what input I gave, the result was always indifference. The breaking point of my childhood, the moment I truly understood my place, happened at a dinner shortly after my 12th birthday. We were eating roast chicken. Evan had just returned from a shadowing day at the local branch of a trucking company my father managed. He was glowing with self-importance. "I told the dispatch manager that we need to buy faster trucks," Evan announced, chewing with his mouth open. "If we drive faster, we deliver more. It is simple math." My father nodded vigorously. "That is the kind of aggressive thinking we need. Son, speed is money." I put down my fork. I couldn't help it. The logic was flawed, and it itched at my brain. "Actually," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "speed burns more fuel. If you increase the speed from 55 to 65, you increase fuel consumption by almost 15%. The cost of the fuel outweighs the profit from the extra delivery, especially if the warehouse isn't ready to receive the cargo. The bottleneck isn't the truck speed, it is the unloading dock." Silence fell over the table. It was not a respectful silence. It was the silence of a disruption. My father slowly turned his head to look at me. He looked at me as if I had started speaking in tongues. "Excuse me?" he said. "I read a study on it," I stammered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "It is about optimization. If you slow the fleet down but coordinate the arrival times, you save money." Evan let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Listen to her. She thinks she knows how to run a fleet because she plays with toy trucks in the basement. It is not toys, I whispered. Lena, my mother snapped, slamming her glass down. Stop trying to sound smart. It is unbecoming. You are embarrassing your brother. Eat your dinner and be quiet. But the math is right, I insisted, my voice trembling. I said be quiet, my father roared. Evan was at the headquarters. Evan knows the business. You are a child who spends too much time in the dark. Know your place. I looked down at my plate. The chicken blurred through my tears. That was the lesson. It didn't matter if I was right. It didn't matter if I had the data. In the Rourke household, truth was not based on facts. It was based on who held the microphone. Love was not a given. It was a transaction, and I had no currency. I finished my dinner in silence. When I was excused, I went straight to the basement without being told. I sat on the cold floor, surrounded by my maps and my drawings. I looked at the complex web of lines I had created. I wiped my eyes. They wanted me to be invisible. They wanted me to be a ghost in the machine. Fine, I whispered to the humming furnace. I will be a ghost. I picked up my pen and opened a fresh notebook. I stopped drawing hypothetical routes and started mapping the reality of my own house. I noted the times my father left for work. I noted the days my mother drank wine before noon. I noted the inconsistencies in Evan's stories. I turned the basement into a laboratory. I treated my isolation not as a punishment, but as a research grant. I learned to love the silence because the silence allowed me to think. I learned to love the data because the data never lied to me. If they had dragged me into the light, if they had hugged me and given me a bicycle that worked, I might have grown up to be soft. I might have grown up to be normal, but by locking me in the basement, by forcing me to find comfort in the cold logic of systems and routes, they did something far more dangerous. They created an operator. And as I sat there in the dark, 12 years old, and completely alone, I realized something that would carry me through the next 2 decades. I realized that while they were upstairs making noise and celebrating themselves, I was down here learning how the world actually worked, and one day, I was going to shut their power off. The summer I graduated from high school, I made the fatal mistake of thinking that meritocracy existed within the walls of the Rourke household. I had graduated near the top of my class, armed with an acceptance letter to the University of Denver's logistics program, and a naive belief that my parents would finally see me as an investment worth making. I placed the acceptance letter on the kitchen counter right next to Evan's protein shake. My mother, Colleen, picked it up with 2 fingers as if it were a used tissue. Denver, she said, the word rolling off her tongue like a bad taste. That is a very expensive city. Lena, an out-of-state tuition? We simply do not have that kind of liquidity right now. I can work, I argued, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. I applied for grants. I just need help with the first semester. My father, Patrick, did not even look up from his newspaper. We are already stretching the finances to the breaking point. Lena, Evan has been accepted into that MBA program in Columbus. An MBA is a strategic asset for the family. It is an investment in the succession plan. There it was, the succession plan, the mythical future where Evan would ascend to the throne of Rourke Transit Holdings and graciously allow his parents to retire to a villa in Florida. So, I said, my voice tight, you are taking out a loan for Evan's second degree, but you cannot spare $1 for my first? Do not be selfish, my mother sighed, tossing my acceptance letter into the junk drawer along with the expired coupons and rubber bands. Evan is going to run the empire one day. You need to stay grounded. Be realistic. Besides, we need you here. The local office is a mess, and Dad needs someone to handle the phones. And just like that, my college degree evaporated. They rebranded my servitude as an internship. They told the neighbors I was taking a gap year to learn the family business from the ground up. In reality, I became the invisible engine of Rourke Local Hall, a subsidiary that my father managed with all the grace of a drunk driver. I did not have a job title. I definitely did not have a salary. I was simply, Lena, do this. Lena, answer the phones. Lena, file these invoices. Lena, why is the coffee pot empty? I spent 10 hours a day in a cramped back office that smelled of toner and stale donuts. My father and Evan spent their days in the front office with the air conditioning and the leather chairs, talking loudly about strategy and synergy. Meanwhile, I was the one actually looking at the numbers, and the numbers were bleeding red. The company was running on archaic systems. My father routed trucks based on gut feeling and old habits. Old man Miller always takes Route 40, he would say. Stick him on 40. Route 40 is under construction for 10 miles, I would point out, staring at the traffic data on my screen. If we send him through the bypass, we save 40 minutes and $12 in fuel. Don't get cute, Lena, my father would snap. We have done it this way for 20 years. Do not act like you are smarter than the adults in the room. So I stopped arguing aloud. I started fixing things in silence. I taught myself advanced Excel functions by watching videos at night. I downloaded open-source mapping software. I started running shadow schedules. When my father gave a driver a route, I would quietly print out a suggested alternative and slip it to the driver with a wink. Just in case there is traffic, I would say. The drivers, tired men who just wanted to get home, started listening to me. They realized that the girl in the back office knew where the speed traps were and where the bridges were icing over. The breaking point, or what should have been the breaking point, came during the great blizzards of 2 winters ago. A massive storm front was hammering the Midwest. We had 6 trucks loaded with perishable goods stuck in a distribution hub in Indianapolis, trying to get to Cincinnati. My father was pacing the office, sweating through his shirt. They are going to freeze up, he shouted into the phone. The highways are shut down. We are going to lose the contract. Evan was sitting in the corner, playing a game on his phone. Useless. I was at my desk, 3 monitors glowing in the dim light. I had pulled up the Department of Transportation's live feed, cross-referencing it with a topographical map I had overlaid with real-time weather data. I saw a window. There was a secondary state road, usually ignored, that had just been plowed by local farm equipment. It was narrow, but it was open. Dad, I said. Not now, Lena. Dad, tell them to take State Road 128 to the connector, I said, my voice cutting through his panic. It is clear. They have a 2-hour window before the next freeze. He looked at me like I was speaking Greek. 128? That is a cow path. It is plowed, I said firmly. I am looking at the satellite feed right now. Send them, or lose the cargo. Desperate, he made the call. The trucks made it. They arrived in Cincinnati 3 hours ahead of schedule, while our competitors were still stuck in snowdrifts on the interstate. The client was ecstatic. They called the next day to praise the genius foresight of the Rourke management team. I was standing by the filing cabinet when the client, a thick-necked man named Mr. Henderson, walked in to shake hands. Patrick, Mr. Henderson boomed, slapping my father on the back. That call to use 128? Brilliant. Absolute tactical brilliance. Who on your team crunched those numbers? My heart hammered. This was it. This was the moment he would have to acknowledge me. My father laughed, a deep, booming sound of unearned confidence. He glanced at me. I was wearing my old sweater, holding a stack of paper, and then looked back at Mr. Henderson. Oh, you know, my father said, winking. We have a new guy in the tech department, young whiz kid, Mike. He is shy, likes to stay in the basement, but we keep him sharp. Well, tell Mike he saved the account, Henderson said. I stood frozen. Mike? He had invented a man named Mike rather than admit his 19-year-old daughter had saved his business. Evan, who had done absolutely nothing during the crisis but eat a bag of chips, chimed in, Yeah, we are really pushing for data-driven logistics this quarter. It is part of the new vision I am bringing to the table. I felt a physical pain in my chest, like a rib had cracked. I turned around, walked out of the office, and went to the bathroom. I stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't cry. I just washed my hands, over and over, until the skin was red. Good girl, my mother told me later that night when I complained. You are being a good team player. Family helps family without needing a parade. Lena, besides, men like Mr. Henderson, they prefer dealing with other men. Your father was just protecting the business image. Don't be so sensitive. While I was being erased in Ohio, Evan was being celebrated in Colorado. Every few months, my parents would buy him a plane ticket to Denver so he could network at the Rourke Transit Holdings headquarters. He would come back with stories that made my stomach churn. "Grandma looks old," he would say, tossing his suitcase on the sofa for me to unpack. But the office? Incredible. Glass walls, view of the Rockies. I sat in on a board meeting. I think the VP of Operations really likes me. "Did you tell Grandma I said hello?" I would ask, folding his expensive shirts. "She didn't ask." Evan would shrug. "She is busy, Lena. She runs a billion-dollar company. She doesn't have time for small talk about whatever it is you do here." "I run the local branch," I wanted to scream. "I am the reason we are profitable." But I said nothing. My parents curated a very specific image of Eleanor for me. They painted her as a cold, distant matriarch who had no interest in her grandchildren unless they were executive material. "She is a hard woman," my mother would warn me. "She does not tolerate mediocrity. That is why we don't want you bothering her. Honey, we don't want you to get your feelings hurt. Evan can handle her. You are too soft." So, I stopped asking to go. I stopped asking to call. I retreated. But I did not stop working. My bedroom had become a storage unit for my mother's shopping addiction, so I moved my life entirely into the basement. It was no longer just a timeout zone. It was my bunker. I scavenged a discarded oak desk from the office dumpster, one my father had thrown out because it had a scratch on the top. I dragged it down the stairs by myself. I bought a refurbished desktop computer with money I made tutoring the neighbors' kids in math. Another job I did that my parents claimed credit for. "Lena loves helping the community," they told the neighbors, while pocketing the compliments. The basement became my command center. The damp concrete walls were now covered in whiteboards I had bought at a discount store. I wasn't just running the local branch anymore. I was running simulations. I had hacked into the public tracking data of Rourke Transit Holdings. It wasn't hard. Their security was laughable, focused on firewalls against external threats, but wide open to anyone who knew the fleet numbers. I watched my grandmother's empire move in real time. I saw the inefficiencies. I saw the waste. I saw a fleet of trucks deadheading, driving empty, from Chicago to Detroit, because the dispatchers weren't coordinating with the return logistics team. I saw drivers idling for 4 hours in Atlanta because the warehouse scheduling software was outdated. I started building a shadow model. I created a virtual version of Rourke Transit on my secondhand computer. I fed it the real data, and then I optimized it. I wrote scripts to reroute the trucks. I reorganized the hubs. In my model, the company saved 14% on fuel annually. In my model, driver retention went up by 20% because they were home on weekends. It was a game, a painful secret game where I saved the family empire every night, and nobody knew. Until the pharmaceutical contract. It was a massive deal for the local branch, a subcontract from the main corporate office to move temperature-sensitive vaccines across 3 states. It was Evan's project. He had bragged about it for weeks. "This is my ticket to the big league," he had said. "I am handling the logistics personally." I knew he was going to crash it. Evan couldn't calculate a tip at a restaurant, let alone a thermal decay timeline for vaccines. 2 days before the shipment, I logged into the company server from my basement. I looked at Evan's plan. It was a disaster. He had routed the trucks through a high-traffic corridor during a holiday weekend, and he had underestimated the dry ice requirements by 30%. If those trucks moved according to his plan, the vaccines would spoil before they reached the state line. The company would be sued into bankruptcy. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the monitor illuminating my face. I could let it happen. I could let him fail. It would be poetic justice. He would destroy the contract. My father would be humiliated. and the golden child myth would shatter. But then I thought about the vaccines. I thought about the people waiting for them, and stupidly, tragically, I thought about the drivers who would lose their jobs if the company went under. I didn't do it for Evan. I did it for the math. I spent 4 hours rewriting the entire schedule. I rerouted the convoy. I adjusted the loading times. I ordered the extra coolant under a generic maintenance supply code so nobody would notice. I swapped the files on the server at 3 in the morning, replacing Evan's suicide note of a plan with my perfect symphony of logistics. The shipment went flawlessly. Not a single vial was lost. The delivery was made with 99% efficiency. A week later, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived from Denver. It was addressed to the management team, Rourke Local Hall. My father opened it at the dinner table, his hands trembling with excitement. "It is from Mother," he gasped. He pulled out a letter on heavy, watermarked stationery. He read it aloud, his voice thick with pride. "Dear Patrick and Evan, I have reviewed the performance data on the vaccine distribution. The precision of the routing was exemplary. It shows a sophistication I did not think our local branch possessed. Evan, if this is the caliber of work you are capable of, perhaps there is a future for you in Denver after all. Keep this up, Eleanor." Evan beamed. He actually puffed out his chest. "I told you I nailed it," he said, reaching for a roll. "I had a feeling about those routes. Just instinct, you know?" My mother teared up. "Oh, Evan, I am so proud. See? You are a natural." I sat there, staring at my peas. I felt a cold, hard stone forming in my stomach. They truly believed it. They had deluded themselves so thoroughly that they actually believed Evan was competent. They didn't even question how the plan had changed. They just accepted the victory as their due. "Lena," my mother said, noticing my silence, "don't look so sour. You should be happy for your brother. Actually, since we are celebrating, clear the table and bring out the pie, and make coffee. Evan likes it with 2 sugars. I stood up, I picked up the plates, I walked into the kitchen, I scraped the leftovers into the trash. "We are such a good team," I heard my father say from the dining room. "Everyone pulls their weight in this family." I gripped the edge of the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. Everyone pulls their weight, but I was the one pulling the cart, and they were the ones riding in it, whipping me to go faster. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went down to the basement. I didn't turn on the main light. I just sat by the glow of my computer screens. I pulled up the map, the real-time map of the United States. I watched the little digital dots moving across the screen. Trucks carrying food, medicine, clothes, 1,000 lives in motion, all governed by rules, by logic, by cause and effect. Everything in the world followed a pattern, except my family. My family was a glitch. I looked at the line stretching from Ohio to Colorado. It was 1,200 miles. It was a 20-hour drive. "If I left," I whispered to the empty room, "if I just disappeared tonight, how long would it take for the trucks to stop moving? Would they even notice I was gone? Or would they just blame the new guy Mike for the sudden collapse?" I zoomed in on Denver. I zoomed in on the street where the headquarters stood. Somewhere in that glass tower was an old woman who respected competence, but she was surrounded by a fortress of lies built by my parents. I was about to close the laptop, ready to give up, ready to accept that I was destined to be the unthanked mechanic of this broken vehicle forever. Then, a notification pinged. It wasn't my work email. It wasn't the family email I managed. It was a secure, encrypted Proton Mail account I had set up years ago for my shadow modeling, an account I had never used to contact anyone. I clicked the icon. From E. Rourke at private, Rourke Holdings, com. Subject, the vaccine route. My breath stopped. My hands hovered over the keyboard. It was impossible. Nobody knew this email address. Nobody knew I was the one who fixed the files. I opened the message. It was only 2 sentences. The timestamp on the file modification was 3 a.m. Evan has never been awake at 3 a.m. in his life. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. A second line appeared below. blinking like a beacon in the dark. If you are the ghost in the machine, I think it is time you materialized. Come to Denver, alone. I looked up at the ceiling, at the floorboards where my family slept the sleep of the righteous and the ignorant. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. They thought I was the maid. They thought I was the assistant. But Grandma knew. The billionaire was watching, and she had just sent me a ticket to the war. The email sat in my inbox like a grenade waiting to detonate. The subject line was simply inquiry, and the sender was E. Rourke at private, Rourke Holdings, com. I had stared at it for 20 minutes, my finger hovering over the mouse, convinced it was a phishing scam or, worse, a cruel prank orchestrated by Evan to humiliate me. When I finally opened it, the message was terrifyingly brief. I have seen some very interesting routing schedules coming out of the Fairfield branch. If you are the one actually writing them, come see me in Denver next week. I will cover the expenses. I read it 3 times. My first instinct was to delete it. Grandma Eleanor did not send emails to family members. She communicated through legal counsel or formal holiday cards, signed by a secretary. But 10 minutes later, a second email arrived. This one was from a travel agency. It contained a confirmed round-trip electronic ticket from Cincinnati to Denver, a reservation at a hotel downtown, and a calendar invite for a meeting at Rourke Transit Holdings for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. It was real. When I walked into the kitchen that evening and placed the printed itinerary on the table, the silence was immediate. My mother, Colleen, stopped scrubbing a pot. My father, Patrick, lowered his fork. Evan, who had been scrolling on his phone, looked up with a frown. "What is this?" my father asked, picking up the paper with greasy fingers. "Grandma invited me to Denver," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "She wants to discuss some of the work done at the local branch." My mother laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound. "Don't be ridiculous. Lena, Mother doesn't discuss business with support staff. Did you beg her for money? Is that what this is?" "I didn't ask for anything," I said. "She emailed me." "Let me see that," Evan snapped, snatching the paper from my father. He scanned it, and for the first time in his life, I saw a flicker of genuine fear behind his eyes. He looked at the booking code, the premium economy seat assignment, the direct meeting line. "Why would she want to see you? You just answer the phones." "Maybe she needs someone to file papers for her," my mother suggested, though she sounded uncertain. "Lena, you really shouldn't go. You will just be a distraction. Mother is a very busy woman. She doesn't have time for your moping or your awkward silence. You will just embarrass us." "I am going," I said. It was the first time I had openly defied a direct suggestion from them in years. "The ticket is non-refundable." "Don't come crying to us when she ignores you for 3 days and sends you home," my father grumbled, returning to his dinner. "And don't think this gets you out of your shift on Friday. You make up the hours when you get back." The morning I left for the airport, nobody drove me. I took a shuttle bus that cost me $40 of my own savings. Sitting in the window seat of that plane, feeling the engines roar to life, felt like an out-of-body experience. I had never left Ohio. I had never been above the clouds. As the plane banked over the Midwest, I pressed my forehead against the cool plastic of the window. Below me, the interstate highway system stretched out like a vast concrete circulatory system. I saw the trucks, tiny white rectangles moving in a synchronized rhythm. From up here, the chaos of the road looked like a perfect equation. I felt a strange sense of peace. This was the world I had been drawing on my basement walls for a decade, and finally, I was seeing it from the captain's chair. Denver was overwhelming. The air was thin and crisp, and the city seemed made of glass and steel. A black car was waiting for me at the airport, a service paid for by the company. The driver didn't ask me to sit in the front or treat me like a child. He opened the back door and called me Ms. Rourke. I almost looked behind me to see who he was talking to. The headquarters of Rourke Transit Holdings was a 40-story tower that reflected the Rocky Mountains in its facade. I walked into the lobby wearing my best outfit, a navy blazer I had bought at a thrift store and tailored myself, clutching my battered laptop bag. The receptionist on the top floor didn't ask for my ID, she just smiled. "Go right in, Miss Rourke. She is expecting you." I pushed open the heavy double doors to the corner office. I had expected a throne room. I had expected intimidation. What I found was a workspace that looked like a war room. The walls were covered in digital screens flashing real-time market data, fuel prices, and weather patterns. In the center of the room, behind a desk buried under stacks of paper, sat Eleanor Rourke. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was pure white, pulled back in a severe bun, and she was breathing through a nasal cannula connected to a small oxygen tank. But when she looked up, the years fell away. Her eyes were terrifyingly blue and sharp as a hawk's. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask about the flight. She simply reached across her desk, picked up a piece of paper, and held it up. It was one of my spreadsheets. Specifically, it was the rerouting plan for the vaccine shipment. "Sit down," she commanded. Her voice was raspy, sounding like gravel crunching under tires. I sat on the edge of the leather chair, my hands gripping my knees. "My grandson, Evan," she began, tossing the paper back onto the desk, "claims he wrote this. He claims he had a sudden epiphany about thermal degradation rates and traffic patterns on State Route 128. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her clasped hands. "I asked Evan last week what the average fuel consumption of a loaded 18-wheeler is on a 6% grade incline. He told me it depends on the driver's mood." A small, dry chuckle escaped her lips, but her eyes remained cold. "Evan is an idiot. He is a charming idiot, but he is useless. This work," she tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail, "is not the work of an idiot. It is the work of someone who sees the matrix." She looked at me. "Did you do this?" My throat was dry. My parents' voices echoed in my head. "Don't show off. Don't be smart. Know your place." "Yes," I whispered. "Speak up," she snapped. "If you are going to take credit for saving a $2 million contract, you do it with your chest out." I took a breath. I sat up straighter. "Yes, I did it. The original route was going to fail. The vaccines would have spoiled outside of Indianapolis." "Why State Route 128?" she fired back. "It is a secondary road. Speed limit is 45. "Because the interstate had a projected construction delay of 90 minutes due to bridge maintenance," I answered, the numbers flooding my brain, pushing out the fear. "And the ambient temperature on the secondary road was 4 degrees lower because of the tree cover, which reduced the strain on the cooling units. We lost speed, but we gained thermal stability. It was a trade-off." Eleanor stared at me. For 5 seconds, she didn't blink. Then, slowly, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. "And the loading dock schedules?" she asked. "You shifted them by 20 minutes. "To avoid the shift change at the warehouse," I explained, my hands starting to move as I spoke, tracing the invisible lines in the air. "If the trucks arrive at 5, they sit for 40 minutes while the union workers swap shifts. If they arrive at 5:20, they get unloaded immediately. That saved us $300 in idling fuel alone." We talked for 2 hours. We didn't talk about my parents. We didn't talk about my childhood. We talked about logistics. We argued about the merits of hub-and-spoke systems versus point-to-point delivery. We debated the future of autonomous trucking. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being interrupted. I wasn't being told to be quiet. I was speaking a language I had taught myself in the dark, and the woman across from me was fluent in it. By the time the sun started to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the office, I was breathless. I felt high. I felt seen. Eleanor wheeled her chair around the desk and stopped in front of me. Up close, I could see the age spots on her hands, the frailty of her skin, but her presence was monumental. "I have been watching the Fairfield reports for 3 years," she said quietly. "I noticed the anomalies, the sudden spikes in efficiency, the reports that were written in 2 different styles, one full of buzzwords and grammatical errors, and one that was mathematically perfect. I suspected someone was propping up that branch. I didn't know it was the girl they told me was slow. The anger in her voice when she said the word slow was palpable. They told you I was slow? I asked, my voice small. They told me you were fragile, Eleanor corrected. They told me you had no head for business. They told me you were happy being a domestic helper. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. I am not going to fire your father, she said, her tone shifting back to business. Not yet. He is family, and firing family is messy. And I am not going to fire Evan, because he is useful as a figurehead for the clients who like shiny things. She slid the folder toward me. But I am not going to let you rot in that basement. I opened the folder. Inside was a contract. It wasn't for Rourke Transit. It was for a company called Aurora Metrics. What is this? I asked. It is a data analytics startup here in Denver, Eleanor explained. I am their angel investor. Nobody knows about my involvement. They need a remote analyst to build their predictive modeling algorithms. You can do the work from Ohio. You will report directly to the CEO, and you will copy me on everything. I looked at the salary figure. It was more money than my father made in a year. Why? I asked, tears finally stinging my eyes. Why didn't you come sooner? Why didn't you stop them from treating me like this? Eleanor looked at me, and for the first time, her expression softened into something resembling sadness. Because you cannot inherit an empire if you do not know how to survive a siege, she said. You have been forged in fire, Lena. They treated you like a servant, so you learned how every nut and bolt of the operation works. They ignored you, so you learned to listen. If I had stepped in 10 years ago and handed you a trust fund, you would just be another Evan, spoiled, soft. She leaned forward and gripped my hand. Her skin was cold, but her grip was iron. I am not saving you, Lena. Do not mistake this for charity. I am giving you a weapon. What you do with it is up to you. I signed the contract. My hand didn't shake. Go back to Ohio, she instructed. Keep playing their game. Let them think you are their little helper. Let Evan take credit for your work at the local branch a little longer. But at night, you work for Aurora. You build your own capital. You build your own reputation. And then? I asked. And then, Eleanor smiled, and it was a smile that promised devastation. We wait for them to make a mistake. I flew back to Ohio the next morning. When I walked into the house, nothing had changed. My mother was complaining about the cleaning lady. My father was yelling at the TV. Evan asked me if I had met any celebrities, completely uninterested in my actual meeting. So, did she give you any money? My father asked, eyeing my bag. No, I lied, keeping my face completely blank. She just wanted to ask me about some old files I organized. It was boring. I mostly just listened to her talk about the old days. I told you, my mother sighed, shaking her head. Waste of a plane ticket. Well, get changed. The garage needs sweeping. I went to my room, my basement. I swept the garage. I cooked dinner. I listened to them mock my little field trip. But that night, when the house was asleep, I didn't cry. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I logged into the secure server of Aurora Metrics. I entered my new employee ID. 2 weeks later, Eleanor video called me on my encrypted line. She looked tired, sitting in her home office with a blanket over her lap, but she wanted to see the code I had written for Aurora. It is good, she said, watching the data stream on her screen. You are building a cage for the market, Lena. I am just optimizing the routes, I said, feeling a new confidence in my voice. No, she said, leaning into the camera. You are learning where the leverage is. She paused, looking at me through the pixelated screen. Listen to me closely, child. They think power comes from sitting at the head of the table. They are wrong. Power comes from owning the table. One day, they are going to try to lock you away for good. They are going to try to take what is yours because they are greedy and they are frightened. She coughed, a deep, rattling sound, before composing herself. When that day comes, they will think they have trapped you. They will think the walls are closing in. But they won't realize that while they were busy looking in the mirror, you were busy buying the building. I understand, I said. Good, she whispered. Now, get back to work. We have an empire to steal back. I closed the laptop. Above me, the floorboards creaked as my father walked to the kitchen for a midnight snack. I looked at the ceiling and smiled. Enjoy the snack. Dad, I thought, because I am counting every crumb. 3 years passed like a blur of binary code and interstate highways, while I was physically still tethered to Fairfield, Ohio, spending my days playing the role of the dutiful silent daughter at Rourke Local Hall. My mind was thousands of miles away. By night, I was a lead analyst for Aurora Metrics, earning a salary that dwarfed my father's, deposited into an account he didn't know existed. I had bought a small apartment on the other side of town, a quiet sanctuary where I could finally breathe, though I still visited the family home daily to maintain the charade. Then came the summons. It was framed as a rare family reunion. My grandmother, Eleanor, sent a formal request for all of us to assemble in Denver. My father, Patrick, was ecstatic. He spent a week speculating that this was it, the moment Eleanor would finally step down and hand him the keys to the kingdom, with Evan as his crown prince. We gathered in the main conference room of Rourke Transit Holdings. The view of the Rockies was breathtaking, but the air inside was frigid. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, looking frailer than I had ever seen her. Her skin was translucent like parchment paper, and the hiss of her portable oxygen concentrator was the only sound in the room. Standing beside her was a man I didn't know yet, a lawyer named Thomas Hale, who held a leather folio with the solemnity of an executioner. I have called you here, Eleanor said, her voice thin but cutting, because my doctors tell me I am running out of time, and I do not like leaving loose ends. Evan leaned forward, feigning concern. Grandma, please, don't talk like that. You have plenty of time. Quiet, boy, she snapped. I am dying, not deaf. Now, listen. She nodded to Mr. Hale. He opened the folio. Mrs. Rourke has executed a restructuring of her estate and the corporate governance of Rourke Transit Holdings, Mr. Hale announced. His voice was devoid of emotion. Effective immediately upon her passing, the entirety of her personal investment portfolio and 60% of the voting shares of the company will be placed into a trust. My father sat up straighter, adjusting his tie. He was ready to accept the burden. The sole trustee and beneficiary of this trust, Mr. Hale continued, will be Lila Rourke. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Evan's mouth fell open. My father's face went from pale to a deep, alarming crimson. My mother, Colleen, froze, her hand halfway to her pearl necklace, a smile of polite anticipation curdling into a grimace of shock. I'm sorry, my father stammered, laughing nervously. I think I misheard. Did you say Lena? I did, Eleanor said calmly. But, Mother, Patrick stood up, his hands shaking as they gripped the table. Lena? She works the front desk in Fairfield. She is a child. She has no experience. Surely this is a joke. Or perhaps the medication is affecting your judgment. My judgment has never been clearer, Eleanor said. She looked at my father with eyes that were tired but unyielding. I am giving the company to the only person in this room who has worked for this family for nothing and never asked for a dime. That is justice. This is insanity, Evan shouted, losing his composure entirely. She's a ghost. She doesn't even talk. She listens, Eleanor countered, which is more than you have ever done. I sat there, stunned. I knew she respected me. I knew she was grooming me. But this was a nuclear option. I looked at my parents and saw something terrifying. The shock in their eyes wasn't just disappointment. It was hatred. Pure, distilled hatred. The flight back to Ohio was excruciating. My father didn't speak a single word. He just stared out the window, vibrating with rage. My mother kept touching my arm, asking if I wanted water. Her voice sickeningly sweet, but her eyes were cold, calculating. like a butcher sizing up a cut of meat. When we landed, the strategy shifted. Instead of the explosion I expected, I got sugar. "Lena, honey," my mother said a few days later, showing up at my small apartment with a casserole. "We have been thinking. You look so tired. All this pressure Grandma put on you. It is unfair. It is too much for a young girl to carry." "I am 26, Mom," I said, standing in the doorway. "I can handle it." "Of course you think you can," she cooed, brushing a stray hair from my face. "But we are worried. You have been acting so distant lately. With Grandma's health failing, we think you should come stay at the big house for a while. Just until things settle down. We want to take care of you. We want to make up for lost time." I knew it was a trap. Every alarm bell in my head was ringing. But I also knew that if I refused, they would come to me. And I needed to know what they were planning. As Eleanor had said, let them expose themselves. So, I packed a bag. I moved back into my old room. Not the basement, but the guest room upstairs. That was when Dr. Klein appeared. He was a friend of the family. My mother said, a wellness coach and psychologist who helped executives deal with stress. "Just talk to him, Lena," my father urged over dinner, pouring me a glass of wine with a trembling hand. "He helps Evan with his anxiety. It will help you process this big change." Dr. Klein was a man with a soft voice and wet palms. He insisted we have our sessions in the library of the main house. He asked probing, twisting questions. "Do you often feel like people are watching you, Lena?" he asked during our second session. "Well, yes," I said honestly. "My family watches me all the time." "I see," he scribbled in his notebook. "Paranoia regarding family surveillance. And do you feel that you are special? That you have secret knowledge others don't?" "I know how to run the logistics better than my brother," I said defensively. "That isn't a feeling. It is a fact." "Delusions of grandeur," he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. I realized then what he was doing. He wasn't listening to me. He was building a narrative. He was cherry-picking my frustrations and reframing them as symptoms. I started looking around the library. Under the heavy oak table, taped discreetly to the underside, I found a small black rectangle, a microphone. They were recording me. They were baiting me into sounding angry, sounding irrational, and they were capturing it all on tape. The gaslighting ramped up. My mother would move things in my room, hide my keys, misplace my documents, and then look at me with pity when I couldn't find them. "Oh, Lena," she would sigh, "you are becoming so forgetful, just like Grandma before she— Well, are you sure you are sleeping enough?" "I am fine," I would snap. "See," she would whisper to my father, "so aggressive, so unstable." The reality of their plan hit me on a Tuesday night. I was coming down the hall to get a glass of water. The door to my father's study was cracked open. I heard my mother's voice, low and urgent. "I spoke to the lawyer in Cincinnati," she was saying. "He says the tapes from Dr. Klein are good, but we need a precipitating event. We need an incident." "How long do we have?" my father asked. "Not long. Eleanor is deteriorating. If she dies before we get the guardianship order, the trust activates, and we lose everything. We need to prove Lena is mentally incompetent now. We need to show she's a danger to herself. Then, as her legal guardians, we can challenge the will. We can argue that Eleanor was manipulated by a mentally unstable girl." I stood frozen in the hallway, the water glass trembling in my hand. Guardianship. They were going to do to me what they did to the elderly and the infirm. They were going to declare me insane. They would take control of my finances, my medical decisions, and the shares Eleanor had given me. I would be a prisoner in my own life, and they would spend my inheritance while I sat in a facility, medicated into silence. I retreated to my room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't sleep that night. I waited until 3 a.m, until the house was silent. Then, I crept down to the basement. It was exactly as I had left it years ago, damp and smelling of mold. I went to the corner behind the furnace. I had bought a spy kit online weeks ago. Having it delivered to a P.O. box, high-definition micro cameras, audio bugs, and a high-capacity encrypted USB drive. I spent the next 3 hours wiring the house. I put a camera in the vent of the kitchen. I put one on the bookshelf in the living room, and I put the master hub here, in the basement, hidden behind a loose cinder block I had discovered when I was 12. If they wanted a show, I would give them a documentary. The next day, my phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. I answered it in the bathroom, the tap running to mask my voice. Lena? It was Eleanor. Her voice was weak, sounding like wind whistling through dry reeds. She was calling from the hospital wing in Denver. "Grandma," I whispered, "they are planning a guardianship. They have a doctor. They are recording me." "I know," she wheezed. "Thomas Hale anticipated this. It is their only play. They are desperate, and desperate people are predictable." "I am scared," I admitted. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I looked pale, tired, exactly how they wanted me to look. "Good," she said. "Fear keeps you sharp. But listen to me. You are about to see how far they will go. Do not interfere. Do not try to stop them. You have to let them commit the crime. You have to let them turn the key." "What do you mean?" "They need an incident. Lena. They need to break you. They are going to try to manufacture a crisis. When they do, you let them, you record it, and you survive it." She paused, and I heard the heavy intake of breath from her machine. "Do not sign anything, no matter what they say, no matter what they threaten. If you sign, it is over. Can you do that?" "I can," I said. "Then get ready," she said. "The storm is coming." The storm arrived 2 days later, disguised as a celebration dinner. My mother cooked a roast. My father opened a bottle of vintage red wine. Evan was actually home, wearing a suit, smiling that oily smile that meant he thought he had already won. "To family," my father toasted, raising his glass, "and to healing." I took a sip of the wine. It tasted metallic, bitter. I looked at my mother. She was watching me over the rim of her glass, her eyes unblinking. "We were thinking," my father said casually, setting his glass down. "That basement door. The latch has been sticky lately. I had a locksmith come by today to fix it, put a heavy-duty deadbolt on it." My stomach dropped. "Why?" I asked. "Nobody goes down there but me." "Exactly," Evan chuckled, stabbing a potato with his fork. "We just want to make sure it is secure, so nobody wanders in or out." He laughed at his own joke. My parents didn't correct him. They just smiled. "It is for safety," my mother added. "You spend so much time down there. Lena, we just want you to be safe." I looked around the table. The warmth of the room felt suffocating. The roast beef looked like raw flesh. The wine in my glass looked like blood. They weren't just talking about a lock. They were talking about a cage. I reached into my pocket and touched the small remote trigger for the recording system. I pressed the button once. A tiny vibration confirmed it was active. "Safety," I repeated, looking my father in the eye. "Right, because that is what this family has always been about." Patrick's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Drink your wine, Lena," he said softly. "It is going to be a long night." I lifted the glass. I knew it was drugged. I knew that in a few hours, the world would tilt and spin. But I also knew that the camera in the vent above the stove was capturing the way my mother's hand shook as she poured herself a second glass. I took a sip. "Let them expose themselves," Eleanor had said. I swallowed the bitter wine. Roll camera. The glass of Pinot Noir felt unnaturally heavy in my hand, like a lead weight pulling my wrist toward the mahogany table. I stared at the dark red liquid, watching the light from the chandelier fracture against the surface. I knew what was in it. I had watched my mother's hand hover over the glass in the kitchen through the camera feed on my phone just 10 minutes earlier, a slight tremor in her fingers as she tapped a fine white powder into the vintage. But I had to drink it. If I refused, they would force it. If I refused, the narrative would shift from concerned family helping a troubled daughter to something more violent, something I might not be able to control. I needed them to think I was compliant. I needed them to think their plan was working perfectly. "Drink up, Lena," my father, Patrick, said, his voice oozing a slick, synthetic warmth. "To new beginnings." "To family," I whispered, lifting the glass. I took a sip, then another. It tasted metallic, masking the oaky notes of the wine. I swallowed, and the countdown began. It hit me faster than I expected. Within 5 minutes, the edges of the room began to blur. The sharp lines of the crown molding softened into waves. My mother's face, watching me from across the table with predatory intensity, seemed to elongate. My knees felt like they had turned to water. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself, knocking over a salt shaker. "Whoa there," Evan laughed, the sound echoing as if he were standing in a tunnel. "She is already tipsy, lightweight." "She is not tipsy," my mother said sharply. "She is unwell. Look at her eyes, dilated, manic." I slurred, letting my head loll forward. "I feel dizzy." "Oh, honey," Patrick said, moving to my side instantly. His grip on my upper arm was bruising, a vice masquerading as support. "You are burning up. You need to lie down. The excitement is too much for you." "My room?" I mumbled, trying to pull away toward the stairs leading up. No, Patrick corrected, steering me forcefully toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. "Ideally, yes, but it is too hot upstairs. The AC is acting up. The basement is cooler. You used to love it down there. It is quiet, just for a bit, just until you settle down." I stumbled, my feet tangling in the rug. I didn't have to fake the stumble. The sedative was dragging my consciousness down into a thick black mud. But as he dragged me past the kitchen island, I forced my heavy eyes to snap open for 1 second. The green light on the smoke detector, the tiny black dot in the vent grill. Recording. Patrick opened the heavy oak door. The smell of damp earth and stale air rushed up to meet me, the scent of my childhood trauma. He didn't guide me down the stairs. He practically shoved me. I gripped the railing, my fingernails digging into the wood to keep from tumbling headfirst into the dark. "Just rest, Lena," he called out. His silhouette was framed by the warm kitchen light, a dark cutout of a father. "We will check on you in the morning. Don't make a scene." The door slammed shut. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home was loud, definitive, and final. Clack thud. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. I sank onto the bottom step, burying my face in my hands as the room spun. I counted backward from 10, forcing my breathing to slow. 10, 9, I am not a victim. 8, 7, I am the architect. I lifted my head. The darkness was absolute, save for the thin strip of yellow light beneath the door and the single, flickering bulb that buzzed overhead. I dragged myself off the stairs and stumbled toward the center of the room. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and unresponsive, but my mind was sharpening, fueled by a cold, crystalline rage that burned through the fog of the drugs. I looked up at the exposed wooden beam running across the ceiling. There, tucked into a shadow cast by a copper pipe, was a tiny pinprick of red light. I stared directly at it. I let my face go slack, let my body sway, ensuring the camera captured exactly what they wanted to see. A drugged, confused woman trapped in a hole. But then, I raised my hand and tapped my ear twice, a signal I had established with myself during the test runs. I am conscious. I am recording. Voices drifted down through the floorboards. They were moving into the living room, directly above me. "God, did you see her eyes?" Evan's voice was loud, unburdened by guilt. "She looked like a zombie. What did you give her?" "Just enough to keep her pliable," my mother replied, the clinking of glass suggesting she was pouring herself a celebratory drink. "Dr. Aris said the mixture mimics a psychotic break if you check the blood markers within 4 hours. Confusion, lethargy, memory loss." "Is the lawyer ready?" Patrick asked. "He is coming at 8 tomorrow," Evan said. "I have the papers printed, power of attorney, transfer of assets, and the voluntary commitment form. We just put the pen in her hand. She won't even know what she is signing. By the time she wakes up in the facility, the ink will be dry." "And Eleanor?" "The old hag is in a coma in Denver," Patrick scoffed. "Or close enough to it. By the time she finds out, we will have legal precedent. We will say Lena had a breakdown and we stepped in to save the family legacy." I listened to them plot the erasure of my life. They spoke about it with the casual efficiency of planning a vacation. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, leaning back against the crate where I had set up my workstation. I pulled up the sleeve of my sweater. My smartwatch was glowing softly. It was a rugged, tactical model I had modified myself. It wasn't connected to the house Wi-Fi, which I knew they had likely password protected or shut down to isolate me. It was connected to a localized mesh network I had hidden in the garden gnomes outside and the gutters 3 weeks ago. A closed loop that beamed a signal directly to a satellite uplift I rented for Aurora Metrics. I tapped the screen. The interface was simple. A single red button pulsating in the center. Protocol. Basement. I pressed it. A small loading bar appeared. Connecting. Uplink established. Package uploading. I watched the percentage climb. 10%, 30%. The package was massive. It contained 3 terabytes of data. It held the video files from the last month. It held the audio recordings of Dr. Me Klein coaching me to sound crazy. It held the emails Evan had sent to his gambling bookies promising payment once the trust clears. It held the scan of the real will Eleanor had given me. And most damning of all, it held the live stream from the last 20 minutes. The drugging, the dragging, the locking of the door. Upload complete. A new timer appeared on the watch face. Countdown. 12 hours. If I didn't enter my biometric code to stop it within 12 hours, that package would automatically forward to 3 recipients: Thomas Hale, the Denver District Attorney's Office, and the editorial desk of the New York Times. "They locked me in with a metal bolt," I whispered to the empty room, the words tasting like iron. "I locked them in with time and data." The night stretched out, agonizingly long. The temperature dropped, the damp chill of the basement seeping through my clothes and settling into my bones. The drugs made me shiver violently, my teeth chattering in the silence. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around myself to conserve heat. Above me, the party continued. They turned the music up. Jazz, loud and brassy. It was a psychological tactic. They wanted to drown out any screaming I might do. They wanted to disorient me. They wanted to make sure I couldn't sleep. I closed my eyes and listened to the bass thumping through the floorboards. Thump, thump, thump. I thought about the little girl who used to cry down here. I thought about the 12-year-old who begged to be let out, who promised to be good, who promised to stop being smart if they would just open the door. I opened my eyes. That girl was dead. She had died the moment they poured that wine. "Thank you," I said aloud, my voice raspy but steady. I looked up at the ceiling, imagining my gaze burning through the wood to where my father sat. "Thank you for giving me back my laboratory. You thought this was a punishment, but you just put the scientist back in the lab, and this time, the experiment is you." I spent the hours watching the dust motes dance in the flickering light. I mentally rehearsed the timeline. The lawyer, Thomas Hale, had the tracker on my watch. He knew exactly when my heart rate spiked. He knew exactly when the basement protocol was activated. He was already on a plane. Around 4 a.m, the music stopped. The house fell silent. They had gone to sleep, secure in their victory, resting up for their big performance in the morning. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I paced the small perimeter of my cage, working the drugs out of my system, flexing my hands, preparing. At 6:30, the first light of dawn began to bleed through the small, grime-encrusted window well high up on the wall. It was a gray, sickly light. Then I heard it. Gravel crunching. It wasn't the sound of a single car. It was heavy, tires rolling slow and deliberate. A car door slammed, then another. Footsteps on the porch. Heavy, authoritative footsteps. Not the polite knock of a guest, but the rapid, hard pounding of someone who owns the door they are hitting. Bang, bang, bang. I heard movement upstairs, scrambling. "Patrick," my mother's voice hissed, sounding panicked. "Who is that? It is not even 7 yet." "I don't know." My father's voice was thick with sleep. "Maybe it is Aris. Maybe he came early." I moved to the bottom of the stairs. I pressed my ear against the wood. The front door opened. "Dr. Aris?" my father asked, his voice confused. "You are early. We haven't even got her up yet." "Patrick Rourke?" The voice that cut him off was not Dr. Aris. It was a baritone, smooth as polished granite and cold as ice. It was a voice I had heard only once before, in a high-rise office in Denver. "I am Thomas Hale," the voice said. "I am the legal counsel for Eleanor Rourke, and these officers are from the Fairfield Police Department." "Police?" my mother shrieked. "What is going on? Why are you here?" "We received a distress signal indicating a kidnapping and unlawful confinement at this address," Hale said. His tone was conversational, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "And per the emergency injunctive relief granted by a federal judge at 3 this morning, I am here to retrieve my client." "Client?" Evan stammered. "Grandma is in Denver. She is sick." "My client is not Eleanor," Hale corrected. "My client is the CEO of Rourke Transit Holdings, Lila Rourke." Silence. The kind of silence that happens when a bomb hits but hasn't detonated yet. "That is ridiculous," my father sputtered, trying to regain control. She is having a mental health crisis. She is resting. She is in the basement." "In the basement," Hale repeated. "Locked?" "For her safety," Colleen cried out. "She was violent." "Officer," Hale said, "if you would." I heard heavy boots moving across the hardwood floor. They were coming toward the kitchen, toward the basement door. "Wait," Patrick shouted. "You can't just barge in here." "I have a warrant, Mr. Rourke," a new voice said. "A police officer. Step aside." But then came the sound that made my heart soar. It was a mechanical whir, a low rhythmic hum of an electric motor. Whir click, whir click. It was the sound of a high-end motorized wheelchair navigating a threshold. "Mother?" my father whispered, the word escaping him like a dying breath. "Hello, Patrick," Eleanor's voice rang out. It was weak, amplified by the acoustics of the house, but it was filled with venom. "I understand you have been hosting a party. I thought I would crash it." I stood at the bottom of the stairs. I looked up at the locked door. I wiped the dust from my face. I straightened my thrift store blazer. "Open the door, Patrick," Eleanor commanded. "Before I have the officers break it down and bill you for the wood." The key turned in the lock. It rattled, shaking from my father's trembling hand. The deadbolt slid back. Thud click. The door swung open. Light flooded down the stairs. Bright, blinding, beautiful white light from the kitchen. I didn't cower. I didn't cry. I walked up the first step, then the second, my head held high. I looked up into the stunned, pale faces of my parents and my brother. They looked like ghosts. They looked small. I smiled. "Good morning," I said, my voice clear and sharp enough to cut glass. "I hope you slept well, because the main show is just beginning." The heavy oak door did not just open, it groaned, the hinges protesting against the silence of the morning as the deadbolt retracted with a heavy, metallic clunk that vibrated through the floorboards. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, shielding my eyes as the harsh white light from the kitchen flooded my dark prison. I expected to see my father's looming silhouette, blocking the exit, maybe holding a pen and the papers he wanted me to sign. But the figure standing at the top of the stairs was not Patrick Rourke. It was a man in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my parents' car. He was holding a leather folder, his posture rigid, his expression carved from granite. It was Thomas Hale. "Ms. Rourke," he said, his voice projecting down into the gloom with the clarity of a courtroom gavel. "Are you injured?" "No," I answered, my voice raspy from the cold and the lack of water. "I am mobile." "Good. Please come up." I climbed the stairs. My legs felt heavy, the residue of the sedative still clinging to my muscles like cobwebs, but I forced each step to be steady. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me stumble. When I emerged into the kitchen, the scene that greeted me was a tableau of total, devastating reversal. My father was backed against the granite island, his face the color of wet ash. My mother, Colleen, was clutching her silk robe at the throat, her eyes darting wildly around the room like a trapped animal. Evan was standing near the sink, looking as though he was about to vomit. And there, in the center of the room, sitting in her motorized wheelchair like a queen on a throne of chrome and leather, was Eleanor Rourke. She looked frail. The oxygen tube was clipped to her nose, and her hands were trembling slightly in her lap, but her eyes were burning. They locked onto mine, and for a brief second, a communication passed between us, a nod of acknowledgement. The trap sprung. Flanking her were two uniformed police officers from the Fairfield Police Department. One was standing with his hand resting casually near his belt. The other was taking notes on a small pad. "This is a misunderstanding," Patrick stammered, his hands fluttering in the air. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "Mr. Hale, really, officers, this is a family matter. She was having an episode last night. She was hysterical, violent. We brought her downstairs to cool off. It is a timeout. We were just about to let her out for breakfast." "A timeout," Thomas Hale repeated. The words tasted like dry ice coming from his mouth. "Yes," Colleen chimed in, her voice shrill. "She was drunk. She was shouting at us. We were scared she might hurt herself. We did it for her protection." Thomas Hale did not look at my parents. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a slim tablet. He tapped the screen once, waking it up. "Officers," Hale said, turning the screen so the police and my family could see it. "I received a digital evidence package at 3:45 this morning. It was uploaded from a secure server located within this residence. Let us review the footage labeled Kitchen Camera, 10:52 p.m. He pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. My mother's voice filled the room, echoing off the tile walls. Just enough to keep her pliable. "Dr. Aris said the mixture mimics a psychotic break if you check the blood markers within 4 hours." On the screen, the video showed Colleen standing right where she was standing now. It showed her pulling a small paper packet from her pocket. It showed her tapping a white powder into my wine glass. It showed her stirring it with her finger, wiping it on a napkin, and then smiling. In the present, Colleen let out a strangled gasp. She backed away from the tablet as if it were radioactive. "No," she whispered. That is out of context." Hale swiped the screen. "Footage labeled Basement Intake, 11:15 p.m., he announced. The video showed Patrick dragging me through the hallway. It showed my head lolling back, my feet dragging on the floor. It showed him shoving me through the door. "Enjoy the dark, Lena. Maybe a night with the rats will bring you some clarity." The sound of the lock sliding home on the video seemed even louder than it had in real life. Hale lowered the tablet. He looked at my father with an expression of profound boredom. "You claim she was violent. Mr. Rourke, the video shows a woman who was barely conscious, being chemically subdued and forcibly confined, in the state of Ohio. That is kidnapping. It is unlawful imprisonment. And given the conversation regarding the will recorded in the living room 10 minutes later, it is also conspiracy to commit fraud and extortion." The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic hiss of Eleanor's oxygen machine. Patrick opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Evan, pleading for help. Evan, the golden boy, the MBA, the future CEO, panicked. "I didn't touch her," Evan shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "It was Dad. Dad locked the door. I just stood there. And she was fine. Look at her. She is standing right there. She is not hurt. We fed her. Well, we were going to feed her." "Evan, shut up," Patrick hissed. "No," Evan yelled. stepping toward the officers. "You are not pinning this on me. I told you this was a stupid idea. I told you Grandma would find out." "Excuse me, sir." One of the officers stepped forward, blocking Evan's path. He reached for the radio on his shoulder. "I think it would be best if you all stop talking. We are going to need to read you your rights." "Rights?" Colleen screeched. "We are the victims here. She is the crazy one. She set us up. Look at her. She is standing there smiling." I wasn't smiling. My face was a mask of cold neutrality. I walked past my mother, past my father, and stood next to Thomas Hale. I didn't rush to Eleanor's side to weep on her lap. I stood beside the lawyer. I stood as a plaintiff, not a granddaughter. Eleanor cleared her throat. It was a wet, rattling sound, but it commanded the room instantly. "I gave you every chance," she said softly. She did not shout. She didn't need to. "For 20 years, I gave you salaries you did not earn. I gave you titles you did not deserve. I looked the other way while you played country club aristocrats on my dime." She turned her chair slightly so she was facing Patrick directly. "And I gave you Lena," she continued. "I gave you a daughter who was smarter than all of you combined, a daughter who fixed your mistakes, who saved your contracts, and instead of thanking her, you tried to bury her." "Mother, please," Patrick whispered, tears streaming down his face, tears of terror, not remorse. We were worried about the company. We thought she wasn't ready." "You thought you could steal it," Eleanor corrected. "I gave you enough rope to hang yourselves, and last night you tied the knot." She nodded to Hale. The lawyer reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He handed it to me. "Open it, Ms. Rourke," Hale said. I broke the seal. Inside was a legal document, bound in blue paper. The header read, "Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Vance Rourke, dated 6 months ago." "You thought I was rewriting the will 3 weeks ago," Eleanor said, her eyes gleaming with a hard, dark amusement. "You thought I called that meeting to announce a change, but that meeting was a test. The will was already signed. It was signed the day I found out Lena was the one running the vaccine routes." "What does it say?" Evan asked, his voice trembling. "Read the forfeiture clause, Lena," Hale instructed. "Page 4, paragraph 3. I turned the pages. The paper was heavy, expensive. I found the paragraph. My voice was steady as I read it aloud. "In the event that any beneficiary named herein, specifically Patrick Rourke, Colleen Rourke, or Evan Rourke, engages in any act of physical violence, psychological duress, unlawful confinement, or legal manipulation against the primary beneficiary, Lena Rourke, their entire share of the estate shall be immediately forfeited." I looked up. My parents were staring at me as if I had just spoken a death sentence. "The forfeiture," I continued reading, "is absolute. It includes all stock options, all real estate holdings currently in the family trust, and all future stipends. Furthermore, any such act will trigger an immediate recall of all personal loans and mortgages held by Rourke Holdings against said beneficiaries." The silence that followed was absolute devastation. "You," Patrick choked out. "You mean—" "I mean, you are broke, Patrick," Eleanor said. "The house we are standing in, it belongs to the trust, the cars in the driveway, leased by the company, your credit cards, company accounts." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of a guillotine. "You didn't just lose the inheritance, you lost the safety net. You violated the morality clause last night when you turned that key. The moment you locked my granddaughter in the basement, you evicted yourselves." "You can't do this," Colleen screamed, lunging toward the wheelchair. "We are your family. We are your blood." The officer moved faster than I expected. He stepped between Colleen and the wheelchair, his hand raised. "Ma'am, step back," he ordered. "We are placing you under arrest for unlawful restraint and administering a noxious substance. You have the right to remain silent." "Arrest?" Colleen gasped, looking at her hands as if handcuffs were already there. But I have a brunch at the club at 11. I almost laughed. It was so absurd, so perfectly Colleen. "I am afraid you will have to cancel," Hale said dryly. "I have already filed for an emergency ex parte protective order on behalf of Lena. It bars all three of you from coming within 500 feet of her residence, or any Rourke Transit property, and since this house is now technically Rourke Transit property under the forfeiture clause, you are trespassing." Patrick slumped against the counter. The fight had left him. He looked old, deflated, a man who had spent his life inflating a balloon only to watch it pop in his face. "Lena," he whispered, looking at me, "please, tell them. We are family. Don't let them take us away." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had mocked my grades, who had stolen credit for my work, who had locked me in the dark to protect his own fragile ego. I thought about Mercy. I searched inside myself for that little girl who wanted her daddy to love her. I couldn't find her. "You are right, Dad," I said. "We are family. That is why this hurts you so much. Strangers would just sue you. Family? Family knows exactly where to hit." I turned to the officer. "I would like to press charges," I said clearly. "I have the video evidence of the assault and the drugging backed up on 3 secure servers. I can provide copies to the district attorney within the hour." The officer nodded. "Ms. Rourke, we will need you to come to the station to give a formal statement, but we have enough here to take them into custody now." "Do it," Eleanor said. The officers moved in. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the quiet kitchen. Click, click, click. Evan started crying. A high-pitched, whining sound. "I didn't do anything. It was them. Mom, tell them. Tell them I didn't want to do it." "Shut up, Evan," Patrick roared, as the officer pushed his head down to guide him out the door. They were led out of their own kitchen, past the expensive appliances they didn't own, past the family photos on the wall that were essentially lies framed in silver. When the door closed behind them, the silence that rushed back into the room was heavy. But it wasn't empty. It was clean. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 20 years. My legs finally gave way, and I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. Thomas Hale stepped forward, offering me a hand, but I shook my head. I didn't need help standing. I turned to Eleanor. She was watching me. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was high. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am tired," I admitted. "My wrist hurts." She nodded at the envelope still in my hand. "You hold the cards now. Lena," she said, "that document gives you control of the trust. The board will ratify it tomorrow. You are the interim CEO of Rourke Transit. You are the landlord of this house. You are the creditor for their debts." I looked down at the blue paper. It didn't feel like a victory prize. It felt like a weapon. "They locked me in the basement," I said softly, the reality of it finally settling in. "They actually did it." "They did," Eleanor said. "They tried to lock you in a room made of concrete." She wheeled her chair closer and placed her cold, dry hand over mine. "So now," she whispered, "I have locked them in a room made of paper and ink and law, and unlike your basement, Lena, there is no loose brick in their cell. There is no secret camera. There is no way out." I looked at the empty doorway where my family had just been dragged out. "No," I said, "there is no way out." I turned back to the lawyer. "Mr. Hale," I said, my voice strengthening, shifting into the tone of the CEO I was about to become. "How soon can we get a locksmith here? I want the locks changed on the entire property, and I want the basement door removed completely." "Removed?" Hale asked. "Yes," I said. "Take it off the hinges. Burn it. Nobody gets locked in this house ever again." Hale smiled, a small, genuine expression. "I will make the call." I looked at my grandmother. "Ready to go to work?" I asked. Eleanor smiled, adjusting her oxygen tube. "I thought you would never ask." The news cycle moves like a freight train, slow to start. But once it builds momentum, it flattens everything in its path. At first, the arrest of Patrick and Colleen Rourke was a blip in the Fairfield Gazette, a small-town scandal whispered about in the grocery store aisles. But when the details of the billion-dollar inheritance feud and the basement imprisonment leaked, the financial press picked up the scent. Within 48 hours, my family's mugshots were sandwiched between stock market tickers on national television. They went from being the respectable local business owners to the logistics heirs who locked their daughter in a dungeon. The courtroom for the preliminary hearing was packed. It smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Thomas Hale. My back was straight, my hands folded on the desk. I wore a simple gray suit, no jewelry, hair pulled back. I was not there to look like a victim. I was there to look like a CEO. Across the aisle, my parents and Evan sat with their defense attorney, a man named Mr. Sterling, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. They looked smaller, without the armor of their arrogance, without the walls of the house they thought they owned. They just looked like three frightened people in ill-fitting clothes. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice booming with forced confidence. "This entire case is a fabrication born of a tragic family misunderstanding. The plaintiff, Lina Rourke, has a documented history of mental instability. The confinement described was a protective measure taken by loving parents during a psychotic episode." He pulled out a file. "We have sworn affidavits from Dr. Klein, a specialist who has been treating Ms. Rourke, attesting to her paranoia and delusions of persecution." I felt a flicker of anger, but Thomas Hale placed a hand on my arm. He didn't even stand up. He just slid a flash drive across the table to the clerk. "Your Honor," Hale said, his voice bored, "if we are discussing Dr. Klein, perhaps we should listen to the unedited audio of his sessions. Specifically, the session dated August 12th. The judge nodded. The audio played over the courtroom speakers. It was grainy but clear. "Now, Lina," Dr. Klein's voice echoed, "don't you think your grandmother is actually trying to control you? Doesn't that make you angry? Say it makes you angry." "I am not angry," my voice replied on the recording. "I am just tired." No, Klein interrupted. "That doesn't help the profile. Let's try again. Say, I feel like everyone is against me. It will help with the insurance paperwork." The courtroom shifted. You could feel the air change. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Patterson, narrowed her eyes at the defense table. "Insurance paperwork?" she repeated. "We can explain," Sterling stammered. "Save it," Hale interrupted. "Let's go to the video." The screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. It was the footage from the basement. It showed the door closing. It showed the deadbolt sliding shut. But the damning part wasn't the lock. It was the audio from the living room that my high-gain microphone had picked up through the floorboards. "Tomorrow we get the guardianship papers." My mother's voice rang out, clear as a bell. "Once she is declared incompetent, we control the trust. We just need to hold her until the lawyer gets here." And then, the sound of laughter. My father's laughter. I watched my parents' faces as the video played. Colleen had her hand over her mouth. Patrick was staring at the table, his face a mask of red shame. Evan was shaking his head, muttering to his lawyer, trying to distance himself from the people sitting 6 inches away from him. The silence in the room after the video ended was suffocating. It wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of a reputation dying. Then came the witnesses. Eleanor Rourke was wheeled into the courtroom. She looked frail, wrapped in a shawl, the oxygen tube in her nose hissing rhythmically. But when she took the oath, her voice was steel. "Mrs. Rourke," Hale asked, "did you ever authorize your son, Patrick, to act as your proxy regarding Lina's education or finances?" "I did," Eleanor said. "For 10 years, I sent checks, $50,000 a year, earmarked for Lina's tuition and living expenses. I wanted her to go to college in Denver." "And did Lina receive this money?" "She did not," Eleanor said, glaring at Patrick. "I was told she refused it. I was told she didn't want to leave home. I was told she preferred to work for the family business. I see now that the money went into a renovation of their kitchen and a new Porsche for my grandson." Patrick flinched. A murmur ran through the gallery. So, to be clear, Hale said, you are testifying that the defendants intercepted funds meant for the plaintiff? I am testifying that they stole from their own child, Eleanor corrected. And when stealing wasn't enough, they tried to erase her. Next came Sarah, a former dispatcher from Rourke Local Hall. She was nervous, twisting her hands, but she looked at me and smiled weakly. Lena ran that place, Sarah told the court. Patrick and Evan, they were mostly out at lunch or on the golf course. Lena did the routing, the payroll, the client calls. She was there until 9 every night, and on payday, everyone got a check but her. Patrick used to joke that her room and board was her salary. Did she ever complain? Sterling asked on cross-examination, trying to salvage something. No, Sarah said. She just worked harder, like she was trying to earn permission to exist. That line hit hard. I saw a juror in the back row wipe her eyes. Finally, they put Evan on the stand. It was a massacre. Hale didn't yell. He just projected an email onto the screen. It was an email Evan had sent to a personal injury lawyer 3 months prior. Subject: Transfer of guardianship strategy. Body: My grandmother is losing it. My sister is weak and thinks she's a genius. If we can prove Lena is unstable, does the power of attorney revert to me as the male heir? I need this locked down before the old lady kicks the bucket. Mr. Rourke, Hale asked, reading the email aloud. When you wrote weak and thinks she's a genius, were you referring to the woman who saved your pharmaceutical contract last year? The contract you nearly destroyed? It was hypothetical, Evan sweated. I was just asking legal questions. You were plotting a coup, Hale said, and when the legal route looked too slow, you decided to speed it up with a bottle of drugged wine and a deadbolt. I didn't lock the door, Evan screamed, standing up in the witness box. It was Dad. Dad locked it. Mom poured the drugs. I just watched. I am the victim here. They dragged me into this. Patrick looked up at his son, his eyes wide with betrayal. Colleen buried her face in her hands and began to sob, ugly, heaving sobs that garnered no sympathy from anyone in the room. Judge Patterson banged her gavel. Sit down, Mr. Rourke. The ruling came 3 days later. It was swift and brutal. The petition for guardianship filed by my parents was dismissed with prejudice. In a rare move, the judge not only denied their claim, but issued a scathing rebuke from the bench. The court finds the actions of Patrick, Colleen, and Evan Rourke to be not only legally baseless, but morally repugnant. Judge Patterson read, You attempted to weaponize the mental health system to defraud a capable young woman of her rightful inheritance. You treated your daughter not as a person, but as an asset to be liquidated. She granted the permanent restraining order. They were barred from contacting me, coming within 1,000 feet of me, or entering any property owned by Rourke Transit Holdings. But the civil ruling was just the beginning. Furthermore, the judge continued, peering over her glasses, I am forwarding the transcripts of these proceedings, along with the video evidence, to the district attorney's office with a recommendation to pursue felony charges for false imprisonment, conspiracy, and grand larceny. My mother actually fainted. She slid right out of her chair. Nobody moved to help her except her lawyer. Patrick just sat there, staring at the wall, his mouth hanging open. I walked out of the courtroom into a wall of flashing lights. Reporters were shouting my name. Lena, how does it feel to win? Are you going to evict your parents? What about the company? I stopped on the courthouse steps. Thomas Hale tried to guide me to the waiting car, but I held up a hand. I looked into the cameras. I knew this moment would be broadcast across the state. I knew the people in Fairfield were watching. I don't feel like I won, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the noise. Winning implies a game. This wasn't a game. This was my life. I paused, looking directly into the lens. I just want to make sure that no one else has to learn independence the way I did. You shouldn't have to build a fortress just to be safe in your own home. That was it. I didn't trash them. I didn't gloat. I got in the car and drove away. The fallout was absolute. Eleanor didn't waste time. We established the Rourke Foundation for Transit Justice the following week. It was a trust designed to overhaul the company, stripping away the bloated management structures my father had installed. I was named the executive director. The real blow to my parents came in the form of a registered letter. The house in Fairfield, the sprawling colonial they had preened in for 30 years, was technically owned by a shell company under Rourke Holdings. Eleanor had bought it for them decades ago but kept the deed. Under the new morality clause in the trust, their tenancy was revoked. They were given 30 days to vacate. I didn't go to the house to watch them pack. I didn't need to. But I heard about it. The neighbors, the same ones my mother used to gossip with, stood on their porches and watched as movers loaded the remnants of the Rourke dynasty into a rental truck. Patrick and Colleen moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of the highway, a place with thin walls and no view. Their country club membership was revoked due to conduct unbecoming. Their friends stopped calling. They became pariahs in the town they thought they ruled. Evan fared even worse. His name was toxic. A Google search of Evan Rourke brought up page after page of articles about the trial, the email, and his screaming fit on the witness stand. He tried to get hired at other logistics firms. He was laughed out of offices. One rainy Tuesday, about a month after the trial, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello? Lena? It was Evan. His voice sounded thin, broken. Evan, I said, you are violating the restraining order. I know. He rushed out. Please don't hang up. I am in Denver. I have been applying everywhere. Nobody will touch me. I heard Aurora Metrics is hiring analysts. You have pull there, right? Grandma listens to you. I sat in my new office, looking out at the Denver skyline. I thought about the time he laughed when I fixed his bike. I thought about him stealing credit for the vaccine route. I thought about him standing in the kitchen while my father locked the door, doing absolutely nothing. I can't help you, Evan, I said. Come on. Lena, he pleaded. I am your brother. I just need a foot in the door. I can start at the bottom. I can learn. You had a head start your entire life, I said softly. You started at the finish line and still managed to lose the race. I built my career from a basement with a dial-up connection. If you want a job, do what I did. Teach yourself. Lena, please. Goodbye, Evan. I hung up. I blocked the number. The final act of the collapse happened on the day they officially surrendered the keys to the Fairfield house. I had to be there for the final walkthrough with the estate agent. I stood on the sidewalk, wearing a trench coat against the chill wind. Patrick and Colleen came out the front door. They looked like strangers. My father's suit was wrinkled. He had lost weight, his skin hanging loosely on his frame. My mother was wearing sweatpants, something I had never seen her do in public. She looked 10 years older. Her hair was undyed, showing gray roots. They stopped when they saw me. They stood on the walkway, holding plastic bags full of the last of their things. Behind me stood Thomas Hale and a security detail, but I stepped forward alone. My father looked at me. His eyes were filled with a confusing mix of anger and begging. We are your parents, Lena, he croaked. How can you do this? We raised you. You housed me, I corrected. There is a difference. We made a mistake. My mother wept, reaching a hand out. We lost our way. But we can fix it. We can start over. I looked at them. I looked at the house behind them. The windows were dark. The basement window, the small one at ground level, was boarded up per my instructions. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. The rage that had fueled me in the basement, the fire that had burned in the courtroom, it was gone. In its place was a vast, cool indifference. They weren't monsters. They were just small, greedy people who had bet against the wrong horse. You are free to go, I said. The house is secured. The police won't harass you as long as you stay away from the company. Lena, Patrick took a step. Don't, I said. The word was quiet, but it stopped him cold. Go to your apartment. Live your lives. Be happy. but you don't get to be part of mine anymore." I turned my back on them. I heard them shuffling to their car. I heard the engine of their old sedan, not the Mercedes, that had been repossessed, sputter to life. I heard them drive away. I looked up at the house. I looked at the second-story window where my room used to be. I looked at the basement door. I felt light. Revenge, I realized as the wind whipped my hair, wasn't about watching them suffer. Suffering was temporary. Revenge was about rendering them irrelevant. It was about reaching a height where their voices couldn't reach me, where their approval didn't matter, and where their existence was just a footnote in my biography. I walked back to my car. "Are we done here, Ms. Rourke?" Hale asked. "Yes," I said, opening the door. "We are done. Let's go build something new." Denver was not a finish line. It was a construction site. When the dust from the trial settled, I did not take a vacation. I did not go to a beach to sip cocktails and toast to my freedom. Instead, I packed my life into 4 cardboard boxes and moved 1,200 miles west, straight into the glass and steel heart of the city that my family had always treated like a mythical kingdom. The headquarters of Rourke Transit Holdings was exactly as imposing as I remembered, but this time, I wasn't walking in as a guest or a secret weapon. I was walking in as the person holding the sledgehammer. The first 6 months were brutal. They were defined not by champagne, but by the relentless, unglamorous work of excavation. Eleanor and I sat in her corner office, her in her wheelchair, me at the desk that used to intimidate me, and we dismantled the boys' club my father had built. We fired the VP of Operations, a golf buddy of Patrick's who hadn't looked at a spreadsheet in 5 years. We renegotiated contracts with vendors who had been overcharging us because they were friends of the family. We purged the payroll of 3 different consultants who turned out to be Evan's college roommates collecting $5,000 a month for doing absolutely nothing. It was surgical, it was cold, and it was absolutely necessary. One Tuesday night, well past 10 o'clock, I was staring at a restructuring plan for the Southwest Hub. My eyes were burning. The office was silent except for the rhythmic hiss-click of Eleanor's oxygen concentrator. She was looking out the window at the lights of the city, a blanket draped over her legs. "You are working too hard," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the machine. "I have to," I replied, not looking up. "I have to prove that I can run this. I have to prove that giving it to me wasn't a mistake. I need the numbers to be perfect so that Patrick and Evan can see them from their cheap apartment and know exactly what they lost." Eleanor turned her chair slowly to face me. Her eyes were sunken, shadowed by fatigue, but the look she gave me was sharp enough to cut. "Stop it," she commanded. I froze. "Stop what?" "Stop building this empire for them," she said. "You are sitting in the CEO's chair, Lena, but you are still living in their heads. If you optimize this company just to spite your father, then he still owns you. He is just charging you rent in a different currency." She rolled closer, her hand trembling as she pointed a finger at my chest. "Do not build this to prove something to 3 people who do not matter. Build it to answer the millions of people who do. There are people out there right now, Lena, waiting for a bus that never comes, waiting for a package that saves their business, waiting for a way out. Build it for them." That conversation shifted the tectonic plates of my world. For years, my motivation had been survival, and then revenge. But revenge is a fuel that burns dirty. It gives you energy, but it chokes you with the exhaust. I realized I needed a cleaner energy source. 2 weeks later, I walked into a board meeting with a proposal that made the old guard trustees choke on their water. I called it the Basement Initiative. "We are a logistics company," I told the boardroom, projecting a map of the United States onto the wall. "We move things from point A to point B. Usually, that means consumer goods. But sometimes, the most valuable thing stuck in a warehouse isn't a crate of electronics. It is a person." I laid out the plan. We would use 5% of our annual net profits, millions of dollars, to fund a specialized program designed to help adults who were trapped in abusive, restrictive, or exploitative family situations. I wasn't talking about children. There were agencies for that. I was talking about the invisible demographic, the 25-year-olds whose parents controlled their bank accounts, the 30-year-olds threatened with conservatorships because they dared to be independent, the black sheep who were cut off from resources and left to starve. We will provide 3 things, I explained, my voice steady. Immediate extraction logistics, meaning we get them out safely, transitional housing and partner facilities, and most importantly, job training. We will teach them how to code. We will teach them supply chain management. We will teach them to drive our trucks. We will give them the keys to their own financial independence. One of the board members, a man named Mr. Henderson, cleared his throat. Ms. Rourke, this is noble, but is it business? This sounds like charity. It is not charity, I shot back. It is talent acquisition. I was one of those people. My family threw me away. If someone had invested in me 10 years ago, Rourke Transit would have saved $50 million in inefficiencies by now. There are thousands of potential engineers, dispatchers, and leaders locked in basements right now. I intend to go get them. The vote passed unanimously. The basement initiative launched quietly, but the impact was immediate. We partnered with legal aid societies to fight fraudulent guardianship petitions. We set up safe hubs at our major distribution centers where people could come for emergency interviews and housing assistance. At the same time, I pivoted Aurora Metrics. We stopped just selling data to corporations. We developed an open-source platform called Open Road, which allowed humanitarian organizations to use our proprietary routing algorithms for free. Food banks used it to minimize waste. Disaster relief teams used it to navigate washed-out roads during hurricanes. I remember looking at the screen one afternoon, watching a convoy of aid trucks in Florida navigate a flood zone using a route my code had generated. That used to be a lock, I whispered to myself. The data used to be the thing that kept me in the dark. Now it is the thing turning the lights on. The media eventually caught wind of it. They loved the narrative. The girl in the basement who was now saving others. I tried to avoid the cameras, but Eleanor insisted I face them. You have to be the face of the exit strategy. Lena, she told me. They need to see that you survived. During a press conference in the lobby of our Denver tower, a reporter from a national magazine asked me the question I had been dreading. Ms. Rourke, he asked, his pen poised. You went from being a prisoner in your own home to running a multi-state logistics network. Does it feel like a different life? I looked at the cameras. I thought about the cold concrete floor. I thought about the smell of the damp earth. Then I looked at the bustling lobby behind me, the drivers coming and going, the movement of commerce and freedom. I just changed roles, I said simply. I went from being the inventory locked inside the warehouse to the person drawing the map. The difference between a prison and a fortress is just who holds the keys. Now, I am making sure everyone gets a set. As the company grew, Eleanor faded. It was a slow, heartbreaking decline. Her visits to the office became fewer. The oxygen tank became larger. She spent more time in her apartment, surrounded by books and the view of the mountains she loved. But every time I visited her, bringing soup or just sitting by her chair, she didn't ask about the stock price. She didn't ask about the profit margins. How is the initiative? She would wheeze, her hand gripping mine with a strength that belied her frailty. Tell me the numbers. We extracted 12 people this week, I would tell her, opening my tablet. 3 from a coercive control situation in Texas, 2 from a financial abuse case in Chicago, 7 are enrolled in the coding boot camp, 4 just got their commercial driving licenses. She would close her eyes and smile, a look of profound peace settling over her face. Good, she would whisper. That is the legacy. The trucks will rust. The money will be spent. But that is the moral inheritance. That cleans the slate. I realized she wasn't just trying to save strangers. She was trying to balance the ledger of her own life. She blamed herself for what Patrick had become, for not seeing my pain sooner. The basement initiative was her penance. My inbox began to fill up with emails. They weren't from business partners. They were from strangers who had read my story. Subject: Me too. Message: My father told me I was too stupid to manage my own money. I am 32 and I have to ask him for permission to buy groceries. I thought I was the only one. Subject: The invisible child. Message: I sleep in the garage. They tell everyone I prefer it. Thank you for showing me I can leave. I read every single one. Late at night, in my apartment in downtown Denver. I would sit with a glass of water and read the testimonies of the invisible army. I realized my story wasn't rare. It was an epidemic. My apartment was nothing like the house in Fairfield. It was on the 20th floor, all glass and clean lines. It had no basement. My favorite spot was the balcony. It overlooked the intersection of two major interstates. At night, the headlights and taillights formed ribbons of white and red light, flowing endlessly into the dark. I would stand there for hours, wrapped in a blanket, watching the cars. Movement. That was the cure. Stagnation was the enemy. The basement was death because it was still. The road was life because it moved. I made a promise to myself on that balcony. I would never be still again. I would never let anyone park me in a corner. I was kinetic energy now. Despite the power, despite the millions of dollars now under my signature, I kept my old habits. I still sat on the floor sometimes to work. I still liked the quiet hum of a server room better than the chatter of a cocktail party. One evening, as the snow was beginning to fall over Denver, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message. The number was unsaved, but I knew it instantly. I had memorized it in childhood, back when I used to pray for it to call me. It was Colleen. I saw you on the news today. You looked beautiful. I just want to say I miss you, Mom. I stared at the screen. The words floated there, innocent and toxic at the same time. I miss you. 3 words that would have brought me to my knees 5 years ago. 3 words that would have made me beg for her validation. But now? I looked at the words and dissected them like a data analyst. She didn't say, I am sorry. She didn't say, I was wrong. She said, I miss you. She missed the supply. She missed the object she used to control. She missed the reflection of herself she saw in my compliance. I felt a sudden urge to throw the phone against the wall. Anger flared, hot and sharp. How dare she? After the trial? After the humiliating eviction? But then, the anger cooled. Anger was a connection. Anger was a tether. If I was angry, I was still in the relationship. I took a deep breath. I typed a response. I am safe and I am well. I hope you are finding peace. Please respect the court order and do not contact me again. I hit send. Then I blocked the number again. I didn't cry. I didn't stare at the phone waiting for a reply that couldn't come. I put the phone down, walked to the kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea. It was the most adult thing I had ever done. I had built a wall, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. The next morning, Eleanor summoned me to her apartment. The nurse met me at the door, her face grave. She is having a good day, the nurse whispered, but she is very weak. Don't stay too long. I walked into the bedroom. Eleanor was propped up on pillows, looking out at the snow-capped peaks. She looked almost transparent, as if she were already fading into the light. Lena, she said, not turning her head. I am here, Grandma. I need you to do something for me. Anything. You want to review the quarterly reports? You want me to fire someone? She let out a dry, rasping laugh. No more firing. I am done with war. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were surprisingly clear, burning with a final, urgent request. I want to go home. I frowned. Home? You are home. This is your apartment. No, she said firmly. Ohio, the house in Fairfield. I froze. Grandma, you can't be serious. That house. It is empty. It is boarded up. We took it from them. Why would you want to go back there? It is a 3-hour flight. The doctor will never clear you. I don't need a doctor's clearance to die, she snapped. the old fire flashing for a second. And I don't want to die in this glass box. She reached out and grabbed my wrist. I have one last piece of business to conclude there, she whispered. There is a scene I need to stage, a final punctuation mark on the story. What kind of scene? I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the snow outside. The basement, she said. I want to go down to the basement. Grandma, there is nothing there. I had the door removed. It is just an empty concrete room. Exactly, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is a blank canvas, and I have one last painting to put on it before I go. Take me back, Lena. Take me back to where they tried to bury you. I want to show you what actually grows in the dark. I looked at her. I saw the determination in her face, a resolve that defied her failing body. Okay, I said softly. I will make the arrangements. We will take the private jet. We will go home. She squeezed my hand, her grip weak but steady. Good, she said. Get the lawyer, get Thomas, and tell him to bring the blueprints. Blueprints? For the house? No, she smiled, and it was the most mysterious smile I had ever seen. Blueprints for the future. The house smelled different. It no longer smelled of lemon polish and repressed resentment. It smelled of dust, emptiness, and the terrifying neutrality of a property that had been seized by a bank. We arrived in a convoy of black SUVs. This time, I wasn't riding in the back of my parents' sedan, listening to them plot my erasure. I was riding next to Eleanor Rourke. She was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her breathing shallow and ragged, the portable oxygen machine humming a rhythmic counterpoint to the crunch of gravel under our tires. Thomas Hale sat opposite us, his briefcase resting on his knees. He looked out the window at the sprawling colonial house that had been the stage for the first 26 years of my life. The eviction notice expired at noon, Hale said, checking his watch. They are legally trespassing as of 5 minutes ago. Give them a moment, Eleanor wheezed, her voice barely a whisper. I want them to see us arrive. We pulled up to the front porch. My father's car, a used sedan he had bought after the company lease was pulled, was idling in the driveway with the trunk open. There were cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly on the lawn. Patrick and Colleen stood by the door. They looked like ghosts haunting their own lives. My father's suit was ill-fitting, hanging loosely on a frame that had shrunk from stress. My mother wore no makeup, her face pale and lined with a map of defeats. I helped the nurse lower Eleanor's wheelchair from the van. Then, I took the handles myself. I pushed her up the walkway, my heels clicking on the stone. The sound of authority, not obedience. Hello, Patrick, Colleen, Eleanor said. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her presence was heavy enough to crack the pavement. Mother, Patrick said, his voice cracking. He looked at me, then quickly looked away. We are just loading the last of the boxes. We didn't think you would come personally. I had to see the renovation, Eleanor said. Renovation? Colleen asked, clutching a ceramic vase to her chest. What renovation? The house is being sold, isn't it? Come inside, Eleanor commanded. Downstairs, all of you. My parents hesitated. Going into the house felt like a violation now, but old habits die hard, and when Eleanor Rourke gave an order, her children obeyed. We walked through the empty hallway. The photos were gone, leaving square pale patches on the wallpaper where the sun hadn't hit for decades. The furniture was gone. It was just a hollow shell. We reached the basement door. It was gone. I had ordered it removed weeks ago. The hinges were bare. The frame was painted a stark, clinical white. Down, Eleanor said. We descended the stairs. My mother gripped the railing as if she were descending into a crypt. But when we reached the bottom, the darkness was gone. The single, flickering bulb that had tormented me for years had been replaced by rows of bright, industrial LED track lighting. The damp smell of mold was masked by the scent of fresh paint, white and cool gray. The corner where I used to sit on a crate was now occupied by a massive oak conference table covered in blueprints. The wall where I had hidden my camera behind the loose brick was clean and exposed. It didn't look like a dungeon anymore. It looked like a war room. "What is this?" Patrick whispered, looking around. "Why did you paint it?" "This," Eleanor said, her voice gathering strength from the sheer force of her will, "is the new Fairfield headquarters of the basement hub." She gestured to the blueprints on the table. "Starting next month, this space will be a training center. We will have 12 workstations here. We will teach logistics, supply chain management, and coding to young adults who have been cut off, disowned, or exploited by their families. The Basement Initiative is funding it." Colleen let out a sob. "But this is our home. This is where we raised a family. You are turning it into a school for strays?" "No, Colleen," Eleanor said sharply. "This is not a home. A home is a place where you nurture potential. This room? This was a prison. You chose to make it a cage for your daughter. I am simply correcting the architecture. I am changing the function to match what should have happened here all along. People will come down here to learn how to escape people like you." I walked over to the far wall. I found the spot. The mortar was fresh where the loose brick had been sealed up permanently. I placed my hand on the cold wall. "I stood right here," I said softly. The room went silent. My parents looked at me. "The night you locked me in," I continued, turning to face them, "you thought I was crying. You thought I was terrified. You thought the drugs had made me confused." I looked at Patrick. "I wasn't confused. Dad, I was working. I was running a diagnostic test on a surveillance system I designed. When you locked that door, you didn't trap a victim. You trapped a recording device." Patrick flinched as if I had slapped him. "I just wanted to keep the family together," he mumbled, his excuse sounding thin and pathetic in the bright light. "I wanted to keep the legacy safe. I thought, if you just signed the papers, we could all be happy. I am your father. Lena, I just wanted to protect you." "No," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You wanted to consume me. There is a difference. You forgot that I was family. You forgot that until the moment Thomas Hale walked through that door with a warrant." "We are sorry," Colleen wept, tears streaming down her face. "We are so sorry, Lena. Please, can't we have a little more time? The apartment is so small. We don't have anywhere to put the piano." "The piano belongs to the trust," Thomas Hale interjected smoothly. "It stays." Eleanor raised a trembling hand. Hale opened his briefcase and pulled out a final envelope. "This is the last of it," Eleanor said to me. "The transfer of my personal liquid assets, the final block of shares. Once I sign this, everything I own, everything I built, belongs to the trust. And you are the trust, Lena." She looked at my parents. "I want you to witness this. I want you to see exactly what you lost." Hale placed the document on the table. He handed Eleanor a pen. Her hand shook violently. She lacked the strength to hold the pen steady against the paper. She looked at me, frustration clouding her eyes. I stepped forward. I didn't hesitate. I placed my hand over hers. My skin was warm against her paper-thin flesh. I wrapped my fingers around hers, steadying the pen. "Together," I whispered. She looked up at me, and her eyes were full of tears. For the first time, I felt a connection that wasn't about debt, or duty, or blood. It was about respect. It was the only healthy relationship I had ever had in this family. We moved the pen together. Eleanor Vance Rourke. The signature was jagged, but it was legal. "It is done," Hale announced. He turned to my parents and handed them a thick manila envelope. "This is from the foundation," Hale said. "It is a relocation assistance check, $5,000. It is enough for a deposit on a rental and moving costs. It is a one-time payment. There will be no further contact." Patrick looked at the check. He looked at the millions of dollars represented by the document on the table that I now controlled. Then he looked at the $5,000 in his hand. "This is charity?" he spat, his pride flaring one last time. "No," I said. "It is logistics. I calculated the cost of moving you versus the cost of legally evicting you if you stayed. Giving you this check was 14% cheaper than paying the sheriff to drag you out. It is just business, Dad." He stared at me. He searched my face for malice, for anger, for anything he could use to villainize me, but he found nothing. He found only the blank, smooth surface of a mirror reflecting his own failure. "Come on, Patrick," Colleen whispered, tugging his sleeve. "Let's go. Please, let's just go." They turned and walked toward the stairs. They climbed out of the basement, their footsteps heavy and slow. I didn't follow them immediately. I waited until I heard the front door open and close. I waited until I heard the engine of their car fade into the distance. Then, I walked to the stairs. I climbed them slowly. I stood on the top step, looking down into the bright, white room. Eleanor was watching me from her wheelchair below. "How does it feel?" she asked, her voice echoing in the empty space. I took a deep breath. The air in the house was finally still. The ghosts were gone. "It feels quiet," I said. "It feels like I can finally hear myself think." "Good," she smiled, closing her eyes. "Then my work is done." I walked out onto the front porch. The sun was setting, painting the Ohio sky in bruised purples and oranges. The driveway was empty. The lawn was clear. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel the urge to shout. I just felt a quiet, profound realignment of the world. For 26 years, I had been the object at the bottom of the gravity well. Now, I was the gravity. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. They were the hands that drew maps. They were the hands that built roads. And now, they were the hands that had closed the door on the past, not with a lock, but with a signature. 6 months later, the sun had long since set over Fairfield, but the lights in the basement were blazing. I stood at the head of the oak table. Around me sat 8 young people. They were a mix of ages, 19 to 28. Some had dyed hair. Some wore hoodies pulled low. Some looked tired in the way that only deep, soul-crushing stress can make you look. On the wall behind me, a large digital screen displayed a complex map of the Tri-State Logistics Corridor. "Okay," I said, tapping the screen. "Look at this bottleneck in Columbus. If the truck leaves at 8, it hits traffic. If it waits until 10, it misses the delivery window. What is the solution?" A quiet girl in the corner, who reminded me so much of myself at 20 that it made my heart ache, raised her hand tentatively. "You don't change the time," she whispered. "You change the route. Use the secondary access road behind the industrial park. It adds 3 miles, but saves 20 minutes. I smiled. It was the exact solution I had used to save the company 5 years ago. "Correct," I said. "You traded distance for time. That is the secret to logistics, and that is the secret to survival. Sometimes the long way around is the only way out." The students nodded, taking notes furiously. I walked toward the back of the room, toward the camera crew that was setting up. We were filming a promotional video for the foundation, something to play at the fundraising gala in Denver next week. The director signaled me. "Ready, Ms. Rourke?" "Ready," I said. I looked directly into the lens. I didn't see glass. I saw the face of every person who was currently sitting in a room they couldn't leave, staring at a phone they were afraid to use. "They locked me in the basement," I began, my voice steady and calm. "They thought the darkness would silence me. They thought that if they hid me away, I would forget my own value. But they made a mistake. They forgot that the basement is where the foundation is built." I walked slowly toward the blueprints on the table, touching the paper. It was here, in the dark, that I learned to see the patterns. I learned that every trap has a mechanism, and every mechanism can be dismantled if you understand how it was built. When my grandmother entered this room with a lawyer, my family thought it was the day they lost their fortune. But for me, it was the day I realized that this room no longer belonged to them. I looked back up at the camera. It belonged to me, and now it belongs to you. The camera zoomed out slowly. On the monitor, the image of the basement faded. It was overlaid with a digital map, the glowing red and blue veins of the supply chain spreading out from Ohio, crossing the plains, climbing the Rockies, and covering the entire country. The map grew brighter and brighter, turning the darkness into a web of light, proving that no matter where you are, there is always a road that leads away. "Have you ever been locked in someone else's basement?" I asked, leaning slightly forward, breaking the fourth wall. "Have you ever felt like you were just a spare part in someone else's machine? If you have, remember this: a door does not only open from the outside. Sometimes, you are the only one holding the map, and the only way out is to build your own road." Thank you for listening to my story. I know what it feels like to be unheard, so I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Are you in your car, your kitchen, or maybe your own quiet corner of the world? Let's connect, and please, subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this roadmap with everyone who needs to find their way out.